Good morning. We had accidents in the south and accidents in the north, so we're glad you all made it in today. I was watching the news and was like, well, we might have some late arrivers on their way down the different I-15 corridors, so thank you for coming. We have not a packed agenda. We actually think this may be the first meeting we actually get you out on time, like without like stress, so we'll see. Sarah and I were like, I think we might make it today. But we do have quite a few legislative updates. There's a lot going on in early reading, so we'll definitely talk to you about that. We wanted to get a little deeper into the KEEP today, as you guys as being one of the stakeholder groups around that. So we'll go through some results, get your input on reporting, what types of reporting might be useful for different stakeholders, and kind of get your insights so that we can build the programming accordingly. And then a little bit on the KEEP exit, and then Liz Williams is here to talk about the KSEP grants. It's time for renewal and new applications, as well as the kindergarten pamphlets. And then Sarah will take you through the K-3 report. It just got kind of updated in December/January, and so there's some new information in there that we'll take you through. And then we'll talk to you about the literacy block funding potential update that we started with you last time we met. Move into some changes to K-3 legislation that we're proposing. Whether the literacy block grant happens or not, K-3 literacy needs to change, and so we've been working with a legislator to make some changes, and so we should have a draft of that out in the next couple of weeks. And then just a couple kind of bright spot highlights around some things that are going on in the state. So the Elementary Reading Network, which is ran through United Way with Granite and Canyons, currently as the active participants in that project. We'll share a couple strategies that have been working. And then we'll just do some general literacy updates. Heather Gross from Assessment will come down and talk about the Dibbles Data Reporting PD that's coming up. I'll be covering Sarah Young's content on early reading software, though there's a new RFP, as well as some legislative changes that are being proposed. So we'll go through that. And then the new report on what's hot in literacy is out, so we'll just share that with you from the ILA if you're interested. And then the next meeting date is there on the bottom. So are our audio friends okay online? So far, so good. All right. Just never know with the online pieces. My thing is not clicking. 1 second. There we go. All right, if you will grab your KEEP report, which hopefully you received via email from me previously to today, and you've had a chance to look it over, but we're going to take you through a couple of key pieces just to make sure if somebody asks you, you are knowledgeable and skilled around what the KEEP report provided, because it does give you some insights on what probably needs to be happening in kindergarten, and if you have any influence on preschool there as well, at least for entry. So on page 3, you have this little graphic, if you want to just turn in and look at that. So on page 3, this is just the overall level of performance. We have 3 levels of performance is what we came up with, and we'll go through what those mean. Level 1 is obviously most at risk. Level 2 is medium risk, and then you have your small to minimal risk in the green. Okay. So for your literacy, we have about 62% of kids that came in at that level 3 of proficiency, where numeracy we had about 72.5. You'll see literacy has a little more divide between the haves and have-nots than numeracy does in terms of we've got about 24% at the level 1, whereas in math you only have about 9% kind of playing in that space. So just an overall picture to help you understand where we are. So we have about 38% of kids coming in not with adequate skills for kind of entry into kindergarten. But again, they come no matter what. That's why it's called the KEEP. We're keeping your children. And then right below that, we've got just the demographic information. So you can kind of look and see how many students took it. We only had 3 or 4 charters opt out. The rest of the state took it. So we had 97 to 98% take the assessment. So quite a good participation rate. We had very few opt-outs on this. But kind of gives you an overview of how the different demographic groups are interacting with the KEEP. We expected a kind of low performance in English learners because it is all in English. So in terms of their actual skill set, maybe not as representative of what they can do, but in English, it is probably representative to some level. I still need to figure out, somebody called and asked me on this and I forgot to look into it, what town is in comparison to rural. I'm not quite sure what the difference is there. So I'll let you know via email because I forgot to look into that. I'm like, I don't know what the difference between rural, town, suburb, and city might be. To take you back to the front, though, if you'll kind of look on the first page, near the bottom, there are 2 bullet points, and then right above that, it says the results of the annual administration. What I'd like you to do is we're going to do some close reading. Close reading is when I read, and when I pause, you fill in the next word in the blank. What we are trying to do with you today is model some literacy practices, because as Sarah and I go into classrooms, teachers are doing all the heavy lifting when it comes to reading. Like, they are the ones reading the text, or the ones telling kids what would be in the text had they been reading something, and we're not seeing a whole lot of kids interacting with text in active ways. So we're going to do some modeling of strategies we've gone out and trained on that have been successful in getting kids into text in scaffolded ways that you might be able to use. I actually was in Granite on Friday and trained a bunch of teachers on these, and they seemed good with it. So here we go. So for this first strategy, we'll kind of take you through all 6 of these today. Sarah will take you through most of them. I'm going to just take you through close to practice. I'm going to read. When I pause, you're going to fill in the blank of the word that comes next, and then I'll continue reading, and I'll pause, and it'll be up to you to continue. All right, so here we go. The results of the annual administration of the very good will help various educational organizations, educators, families, and by providing insights into current levels of and social emotional performance upon entry and of kindergarten, identifying students in need of early instruction and promoting differentiated instruction for all. Turn the page. Analyzing the effectiveness of programs such as extended day kindergarten and providing opportunities for data-informed decision-making and cost-benefit of early learning initiatives, identifying effective instructional or strategies for improving student achievement outcomes in a targeted manner, and finally, understanding the influence and impact of full day on at-risk students in both the short and long term. What I'd like you to do, since we've read through that once, I want you to go back through it, take a look, and develop a 20-word or less summary of how this data can be used to kind of move systems forward. And I want you to write that summary on your own to start. Just 20 words or less. What are some of the ways we can use the data? And then I also want you to come up with one example of how you personally are currently using this data in your practice. So your 20-word summary and one example of how you use the KEEP data results, or could potentially use them. And we are going to partner quite a bit today to keep this interactive. So if there is someone next to you or near you that you can interact with today, find them, decide who's going to be partner 1 and who's partner 2. I'll give you about 15 seconds to either introduce yourself, just make sure they're awake and look somewhat collegial, and then we will join. So 15 seconds, find somebody who looks friendly, and we'll partner, decide who's partner 1, who's partner 2. All right, if you're a partner 1, if you'll put up 1 finger. If you're partner 2, put up 2. Make sure they're friendly fingers for me, please, this morning. All right. It's always dangerous in a middle school classroom. I would not recommend it. All right, so partner 2, you're actually going to go first because partner 1 always thinks they have to, so I'm going to switch it up a little bit. Partner 2, you're going to go first and share your 20-word summary. Then partner 1, you're going to share your 20-word summary and also add your example of how you could use this data or how you currently are. And then partner 2 is going to add on how they are using that in the KEEP data. Okay, so summary first and then the examples. You may go ahead and chat. And those online, you can do a little chat in the chat box around how you're using the data. Angie just said something about that early reading assessment. All right, come back in 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, hopefully you either met a new friend or got to visit with someone for a little bit about how we could summarize how we're currently using this data. We had a number of bullet points of how we want to. One of the ways that we're using at USBE is the lowest area across the school districts is not a surprise to us. It's something we've talked to you about for the last couple of years. And it comes down to phonemic awareness and phonics. Seems to consistently be an underperforming area in our state. So we're working with our preschool teachers with some professional learning in the next several months around those key critical areas. Because with this many students who also participated in preschool, still coming in not having the basics of phonemic awareness and phonics, we have a gap that can be filled by some education with our preschool teachers, because we go out and do preschool observations for various grants, and we don't see phonemic awareness instruction happening in those preschool settings very often. It's very rare, and it's honestly a key critical early intervention skill. If you want to prevent kids from having reading difficulties, you teach phonemic awareness. And so we're not seeing that in a lot of our settings. So this data just gives us another reinforcement that this isn't happening and a way to monitor over time, hopefully some progress in that way. All right, so the next section, we want you to clearly understand the levels of performance. But before I go there, I put up a little document that I just loaded in your folder because I've kind of started using this whenever I give PD now, because there's some really effective practices that as we do different types of literacy learning that are more effective at different stages of learning, but we know what's working and kind of helping our teachers to pick the strategies that are going to work best. So this is like the EL note-taking guide. We're using this with curriculum directors tomorrow, but I was thinking our LDs could probably use it too. This comes from the Visible Learning for Literacy book, the newer one, the K5 book, in terms of what strategies work when. So last year we talked about surface learning, deep learning, and transfer learning, and this is kind of bringing that back into what strategies at that 0.4 effect size or higher are most effective at the different levels or stages of learning. So within this first one, that surface learning category, you'll see a number of strategies that you're familiar with. None of these should be mind-blowing or surprising. Note-taking, comprehension, annotation, summarizing, leveraging prior knowledge, vocabulary, repeated reading, and spaced practice is kind of a little short summary of that particular section. And so while you were reading the article or the report today, we had you summarize, which is a 0.63 effect size, because it requires you to synthesize information, pull key ideas, and have those elements of what is important in a text. Obviously, it takes teaching of summarization for people to be able to do that, but as adults, you're more than competent at that skill. But a 0.63 effect size is a good return on our investment. So in terms of just you as your kind of modeling instruction for teachers, these strategies might be things you want to incorporate into your own professional learning, because if we can model them and show teachers how they work in practice, they'll be more likely to kind of incorporate some of these strategies in their own instruction. It's not in your notes, it's only online today because I just decided to throw it in this morning. But it's definitely a tool that, as I've been using it with teachers, kind of redirecting. We do a lot of things in education that work, but not always the best things that work. And so this is just a list to kind of get people thinking, if this is new to kids, then I go to the surface column, right? This is new information, it's a new skill or strategy or content. I want to use strategies that are going to work for surface learning. Once we've got some basics and we've got some skills to work with, then I can go to that kind of deep. We're ready for a deeper understanding, kind of moving into the more abstract realm, and these types of strategies are more effective at that point. And once my kids have deep understanding of a content or skill, and we're ready to kind of transfer that skill or knowledge, then we would use things like this. For example, problem-solving teaching. You can think of this as like problem-based learning, or however you want to code it. That doesn't work at surface level. You don't throw kids into a problem-solving experience where they don't know anything. They need some understanding and some skills to be effective in the problem-solving space. And so it kind of helps teachers to realize when is a particular strategy effective and when maybe being employed is not as effective as waiting or using it earlier. So we're going to model some of these strategies with you today, and summary was one of them, just to kind of try and be better models for you all in terms of effective literacy practice, but hopefully things that you can take back and use in your own settings. So I'm going to pop back in here. What I'd like to do is go over the levels of performance, as there are 3. Okay, and in the text, it's on page 2, and the orange box is to kind of put you in the right category for that, to be able to find it in your text. There's level 1, 2, and 3. We want to make sure that you understand what those particular levels of performance are, so that if you're explaining this to somebody else, we have a high level of competence. And what I'm going to have you do is you're going to close read with a partner. So partner 1, you are going to pick 3 to 5 words in this kind of text category between level 1, 2, and 3. And then partner 2, you're also going to pick 3 to 5 words to leave out, and you're both going to read it. Partner 1's going to read first, and when they leave out a word, partner 2, you're going to fill it in. Then partner 2, you're going to read, leave out some words, and partner 1 will fill them in. So you'll be reading the text twice, but you'll leave out different words, presumably. You may leave out the same ones, it really doesn't matter. But it's just to kind of build our fluency, get us into the text, let us practice. Now in the classroom setting, who should probably read first when something's new? The stronger reader. You're all strong readers, not worried about you. But in practice, we want to help our teachers realize strategic partnering matters, and we want to have kids that have a stronger partner with them so that it's not 2 weak readers reading together, but there's a stronger one to model first, and when we close read the second time, I've had a little scaffolding from my partner to help me have greater access to that text. All right, so you're going to close read, underline or star the words you want to leave out. I'm going to tell you it's easier to do that in your written on your paper than do it while you're reading, if this strategy is new to you. One thing just for you to know in terms of this strategy, you don't leave out too many words. I once trained this early on and realized I didn't tell people how many words to kind of leave intact. And so I was like, yeah, just leave out some words every once in a while. And the guy was like, well, I came back, was the teacher. I tried that strategy, it works great, but instead of like every so many words, we did every other word. And the kids love it. I'm like, oh, that's great for edutainment, but not so great for comprehension, right? So generally you want to leave every 7 to 9 words intact before you kind of leave a blank. That way there's enough comprehension happening along with engagement without losing the whole point, which is why we're reading, which is to make meaning. So just keep the frequency down a little bit. Every other word is really just going to be like a crazy chaos at moment in your classrooms. So level 1, start there. Person 1, you're going to read first, leaving out some blanks, and then partner 2, you'll respond, and then you'll read. And go. Go ahead and wrap up your reading in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, in a supplemental piece, that's a good kind of just definition. So if you're trying to explain level 1, 2, or 3, great. But we have one that goes a little more into depth. So in your other packet that starts with says keep cut scores and scoring adjustments. Because this was an operational field test year, we learned some things from giving the keep that we had to make some adjustments for. And I'm going to talk you through those just for your own knowledge and skills in case people ask you. You can be the knowledgeable one in your LEA around it. But on the last page of that particular kind of stapled packet, there is a table that looks like this. That's up on the screen on the lower right. This goes into a little more specificity of how we came up with those performance level descriptors. So that same kind of header category is what you just read with your partner. But below that, it tells you a student entering kindergarten at level 1, here's what that means in literacy, and here's what that means in numeracy. That's probably more transparent for a parent to understand than the level 1 lofty language. So in terms of really understanding, if a kid scores at level 1, here's what they can or can't do. Okay, so if you want to just take a kind of a gander across those categories. This will be a piece that we will add to the student report as we start doing some reporting to help parents understand what different levels of performance mean. The reporting categories do not have these levels of performance. The only level of performance categories are literacy and numeracy. There's a couple of reasons why the reporting categories don't have it. Psychometrically, there's not enough data there to necessarily be highly accurate to say, well, you're a level 1 in phonemic awareness, but you're a level 3 in letter recognition. There's just not necessarily enough data in each of those reporting categories to report out levels. So you're only going to see this level at the highest kind of holistic in literacy and numeracy. The reporting categories are a whole different thing that I'm going to explain to you, just so you know what those mean and how to use that data in your LEA to improve literacy instruction. So that's just kind of a little overview of the levels of performance. Let's take a look at the reporting categories. The reporting categories has been quite the story. Lots of questions came up on the report for a couple of reasons. One, this header makes it seem like that's the percent proficient. That's not actually true. That header is wrong. So I'm going to clarify that. So if you want to cross that out in your report, that is not accurate. I'm going to try and explain this to you. I had a number of assessment directors email me. None of you were like worried about this, but the assessment director's like, what does this mean? Why doesn't this data match this data on the next page? And there's a reason for that. They represent different ideas. So the reporting categories, we were able to come up with like 4 sub-reporting categories for literacy and 5 for numeracy, of where if a kid performed here in these kind of areas, they were able to group nicely together. So in literacy, you have letter recognition, which is your upper and lower case pieces. Then you have letter writing, which is when they had to write their name and the letters that we said to them. Then you have your PA, which was that first sound fluency and phonics components that we had. And the pre-literacy skills are the oral language and the concepts of print type sections. What this actually represents is the typical number of points that the student got, or percentage of points that the student got of the total possible, which gets super complicated. So basically, if you look at this in our state, the typical student got 62.7% of the points possible in letter recognition. Well, one thing you would need to know is how many points are possible to know is that good or bad. So there are 52 points possible for letter recognition because we had 2 items with 26 points each, made 52 points. So the typical student earned 62.7 of those 52 points, which is really 32.6. So on average, in Utah, a kid coming into kindergarten knows about 33 of the upper and lower case letters. Okay, that's what that data means. It is not clearly transferred in this data table in that way. So we're going to represent this differently in the future to kind of just do the math probably in advance and tell you what the typical number of points a kid earned, because I think that translates better than this percentage. But our data and statistics folks were like, yeah, 62.7. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything to me. So explain it. And once they explained it, I was like, oh, I would have represented that a little differently. So hopefully that helps. So as you look at your district data, which is in the back of the report, so going back to our colorful KEEP report. In the very back, I had a few emails that said, hey, why don't our literacy percentages match with the literacy percentage on the previous table for our district? So you have two tables in the back here. You have the really colorful purple and green, and you have the one right before that that's purple or blue, depending on if you're an LEA or a charter. I mean, a district or a charter. So you'll look at this. This is your overall literacy and numeracy. The percentage of kids who scored proficient at a level 3 in your district in literacy and numeracy. That's when you're looking at pages 4, 5, 6, and 7, I think. That's what that score means. Okay, so if the state scored 62% in literacy, you can say, are we above or below the state average? That's one way to look at that data. You can also look and see how districts similar to yourselves or charters similar to yourselves scored relatively to you to kind of see where are your kids coming in. This was the beginning of kindergarten. This is the entry test, so we'll wait for data for the exit. That's a whole nother experience. Good question. So when you move through to the last kind of table, Appendix A, where it says reporting category results by LEA, now you can take the same kind of data from the state level and either look and see how you compare it at the state level, like where did your kids come in. So if I'm Alpine, I had 62.3% in literacy overall. Okay, that doesn't match my level 3 performance. That's just out of the total points possible in literacy, which is 108. The kids in Alpine scored 62.3% of the points possible. And then I can do the math, 108 times 0.623 equals blah, blah, which I think was like 60 some odd points. To pass literacy, you had to score a 47. That was the cut score. So the average kid in Alpine is a level 3, if not higher than that kind of minimum benchmark. But as you move across those reporting categories, what you can look for is where's your low area. Whether you calculate the number of points possible in there and figure out your average, you sure can, and I have the data in that other document for you. But you can just look across literacy. What is your lowest scoring reporting category? Just take a look for your particular LEA. Everyone, what's your lowest scoring? Thank you, friends. My work here is done, okay? Like, it's everybody. PA and phonics is our lowest scoring category. If you are not low in that area, lucky for you, but it is a rare occasion that I look through this and don't see that as everyone's lowest reporting category. Okay, and then you can look at your numeracy, same thing. So I wouldn't be as concerned. You're more than welcome to be concerned and do the math and figure out what was the average score for your kids, because I'll give you that data. But really, where are your kids low? Where are they performing well, right? And you can get that from the percentage. The higher the percentage, the more points they got out of the total possible. The lower the percentage, the lower amount of points they got out of the points possible relative to that area. And then you can also compare, in comparison to the state, where your kid's coming in. I think one of our schools got like 4% of kids were proficient in literacy coming in. That's a super low starting point. Like, that is something, we got to do something birth to 5 differently, right? That is a hard starting point. But then you also had schools that scored like 96% of kids came in proficient at level 3. We have a huge range in our state of where the kids are coming. Most of the larger LEAs, you didn't see that kind of grand scope. Those are both charter schools that are experiencing that great gap or great level of proficiency. But you can also use this kind of reporting categories to say, how are we similar to the state average? And then also look at LEAs that are like you that you usually compare to see how they are, how their students are coming in. So I hope that makes a little more sense as you look through the data. I just figured this would be a great opportunity to explain it, so a few of you would have that kind of information. I added the KEEP reporting category composition to the document that has the level 1, 2, 3. On the page right before it, middle down, it will tell you, here's the reporting category, and here's how many points are possible in that reporting category. So if you want to do the math, you can do it on each one and figure out what's the average score for kids in our building in letter recognition. And then that can help teachers to realize at this point it's kind of dull, right? Like, I wouldn't go back to your kindergarten teachers and train them all up, because this data is so old, it's not really going to represent their kids anymore, I hope. I hope they've seen tremendous growth, and this data is so old, they're like, I don't really care. Next year, it'll be instant reporting. And a couple of pieces that go into that is, if we do instant reporting, it's not going to be able to take into account what is the state average of performance, because if you test the first week of testing window, you're not going to have the whole state to compare to. Now, over time, we'll be able to pull those reports, for your LEA and the state level and all of those things. But for the individual student reports, it's just going to tell you how that kid did. It's not going to tell you how that kid did in comparison to the other 46,000 kindergartners, because we'd have to wait for the data. And the whole point of this is to have instant reporting. And so just so you know, as we do the reporting, it won't be comparing them to the norm. Once we have a couple of years of data, we might be able to do that, where we can pull in the past couple of years in Utah, here's been the average performance, here's where your kid is in comparison. But we want more than a year of data to kind of set that stage, okay? We did have to make some scoring adjustments, so that's what's else in this document. Because, for example, in oral language, well, we had 30 points possible. The highest score any kid got was 19, but we also had to kind of scale that. Like, we're not expecting kids to get 19. So that went from 30 points possible to 4, which totally changed your cut score, changed how many points are possible. And so when your teachers might be looking at the data and the cut score is 47, well, if they don't adjust that oral language piece being 30 points down to 4 points, they could have kids that really are proficient who don't show proficient, or vice versa. So we'll be fixing all of that in the reporting suite for next year. But this year we're not changing things because we're reprogramming it and making it way better. So we're not taking the time to go back and fix right now. That data was really just to kind of give us this starting point and opportunity to see where did we have to amend. The other one that got a change was the oral counting. So kids were counting to 20. Well, having 20 points in that particular item when all of math was like 54 points was super hefty, right? So to kind of equate that down, I think we went down to a 3-point scoring piece there. 0 to 3 is how many points you can get. So if they counted between 0 and 5, they got so many points, 6 to 10, and so on. So it was kind of broken down a little differently. So just a few changes based on what we saw with the way kids scored. We do have the keep entry almost ready to be released for next year with all the revisions made. We just need to make a couple more on the scoring, just do some changes here. We're not changing a whole lot. The test actually performed really well. I know the math, I need to look at the literacy, but my dissertation's in math, and so I used the keep for part of it. And it has a 0.92 reliability coefficient. So it's actually a highly reliable test, and the numeracy, literacy is very similar. There's a couple sections that get down in the 0.67 range, but the vast majority of the sections get up in that 0.8, 0.9 range, and the overall test is a 0.92. So that's a really great, if any of you are statistically proficient, it's a really good reliability coefficient, which means the test is reliably measuring what we intended it to measure and representing. And the validity is high as well. So if you're interested in those, I have those documents if you really want to dig into the KEEP. But for a state-graded assessment, we're pretty happy that it ended up so high and strong. So we aren't making a whole lot of adjustments for KEEP entry. Most of it was just feedback around more opportunities to prompt. So most of the prompting has been to as much as necessary or as often as you would like to, that kind of thing. The items didn't change a whole lot, which will make it nice for your teachers. There won't be a whole lot of change for those that are used to it. Okay, so that was that piece. Keep data entry. That was probably the worst part of this test this year. If any of you had to go in the system and enter kids, it was a little overwhelming. It was not as easy to use as it could be, and so we've been meeting with the programmers. We started meeting with them in December and are kind of working through what it's going to look like. So they were like, can you show us what you think it should look like? So this was like a rough, give me 2 minutes in a meeting example. It'll be much better, but the general principles are here. There's two pieces. There's one that if the kids are in the system, and this will work for exit just the same. If the kids are enrolled, which exit will be much easier for the kids to be enrolled than entry was. Many of you were not able to test live because your kids aren't enrolled in kindergarten at entry, but exit, the kids will be in the system. Teachers can choose, do I want to test live and enter the scores as I go, or do I want to enter the data after the fact? So they'll have that choice still. But if they choose to enter the data live, it'll basically be like a, I call it an iPad app. It's going to be in the data gateway, but a screen will pop up. They'll get the first question. They'll have their teacher manual, and they will just enter the score, and they'll click next. They'll be like, this is the playground one, right? So this is item 1. It'll say item 1, oral language, blah, blah, blah. It'll have the scoring options. They'll click on the radial button that makes sense. It'll have a little visual support for whatever item they're on if it has a visual cueing sheet, just so they're like, yep, that's the item I'm on. And then they'll click next, and it'll go to item 2. Okay, so it'll kind of just be this single screen for each item so they can proceed through with the kid. along the way. In terms of what it'll look like letter recognition, if you can remember back to like the ABC sheet, it'll just have that look up here just the exact same way. So 6 letters per row. There's 2 letters on the last row. They will touch the ones the kids gets wrong. It'll automatically calculate and they'll do next. Okay. So it'll basically, they'll be able to just enter it kind of like you're doing amplify Dibbles data. Like you just touch the screen, do the incorrects, and it'll do the calculations for them. So that's the way we're trying to make this kind of module up. So it'll allow for either click or touch screen if you have a touch ability. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So it will track everything. So it'll also go back into the coding system of, well, they got B, but they didn't get C, and it'll have all those marked. And we're changing up what that data entry screen looks like. So right now, if you've seen the data entry, letter recognition, for example, has like 20 letters and then 6. We're going to have it match what their paper copy looks like. So it'll have the 6 letters on each row. So it's really easy for them to go back and make up. And they'll be marking incorrects in the system instead of corrects, which was odd last year. Like it said incorrects on the scoring sheet and the system was marked the corrects. We're going to align some things. Like teachers will be very happy, I think, in comparison to what they dealt with this year. But we need your help to make sure we make it the best we can. We are spending a lot of money on this particular part of the test, trying to make this part functional at a much higher level. So the other piece that we're looking at is how do we do, so we have this kind of general screenshot, and we'll take your feedback here in a minute, of what kind of entering would look like if you're doing it live. If you're doing it paper pencil, it's going to be similar to the layout before, where you get all the items, you mark what's incorrect, and it scores and that kind of thing. But it'll be much prettier. It'll have a lot more aesthetically pleasing properties to it. But for keep reporting, we really want to make sure we get this right. And we thought you might be a good audience of what would you want, either as an LEA, as a parent, as a teacher, if you were the one getting these reports. So the first kind of level of reporting is the individual student/parent report. Basically, this would be the piece that you would print out and give to parents. So one of the things that we want to make sure that's on there is show their level of proficiency with their cut score. Because the cut score for literacy is 47. Well, let's say I got 95. That's a much higher level 3 than a kid who got 48. And so we want to make sure we can represent that. So this is a very rudimentary mock-up. But I was trying to show the programmers, I'm like, well, here's level 1, here's level 2, here's level 3, here's my cut score as this particular child. So the parent can say, oh, well, they're not scary close to level 2, but they're not like way up in level 3 either. But they're in a safety zone, right? We'd be pretty happy with a kid that came in with a 62 cut score. So just kind of one way to represent the data. And they'd have one of those for literacy and numeracy, 2 different bars to kind of represent their overall performance. Then we might be able to show how they performed in the 9 reporting categories, but I'm going to show you how we're going to do that a little differently. Because the percentage thing, or how many points you got, what they're going to ask you, if I say you got 8 out of 10, well, what 2 did they miss? That's what's going to be asked. If you're that kind of parent, you're going to want to know. So we want to go down to that particular level. So I'll show you what that looks like. The next part is suggested skill areas. So we'll pick kind of those really key skills. If you're a kid that gets like 0 or 10, where do you think we should focus? We're going to start with PA and phonics probably, and then pick another key critical skill, and give them some suggestions of what they can do at home that are easy, low cost to no cost options of how to kind of reinforce those skills with their student in the student report. Okay, and then a description of the levels and what they mean, kind of like we did with you today with the levels 1, 2, and 3. So I need to show you, I think I must have it in a handout if it's not up here, what the individual student report looks like. Maybe I didn't, yes, it's in this packet. So this is an example. Yeah. So the question is, can you show the growth from entry to exit? Yes. So this particular report will just be entry, but as we look at the exit report, it'll show like what they got at exit, but also their growth over the year from entry to exit. Yeah, so we're focused right now on entry just because we can get that part done, because exit test is still in development, and we're testing kids this week to go see how it works out. We did pilot a bunch of the items on exit last year, but we want to go do like the timing of the exit at this point now that it's fully fleshed out. In your packet that has the little bar on it, there is an example of a potential student report that goes down to the individual item level that shows exactly what they got right, exactly what they got wrong to the individual item or letter, okay? This is more what we're thinking for parents for that individual student report. Teachers can obviously pull this as well. We'll have another functionality for them to pull their whole class at once to kind of look at this kind of data. But we thought if you were going to give the points, well, they got 6 out of 10, or they got 2 out of 10. The parent is likely to ask you, or at least some of them, well, what did they miss? What did they get right? And you would have to go back into the data source and figure that out. This way, it would just print out. They would know everything about their child. So that is the point of this one. So take a look at those, because we're going to ask you for some feedback on the different levels of reporting. And I left off student, which we probably should have on here. It's because I gave you so many samples. I was like, they won't have feedback on that one. So you have a sheet that looks like this. It's just a little quadrant. And I left off the student. So let's just put the student maybe on the back if you have feedback on how we can make sure that student parent report really gets functional. And we're going to have you kind of work in tables today. So you can just fill out one sheet as a group in your table so that we can get that feedback and use that with our programmers for further reporting decisions. But that's only one level of reporting. You also have the class level, like that's what's useful for the teacher. You have the school level, which is where the principal might say, well, how are my kindergarten students performing at the individual teacher level, but as a school overall as well, depending on how many kindergarten teachers you have. Then you have the LEA level, which for some of you, the school and LEA level is the same if you're in a charter school. But other ones, it's like, okay, well, now we have all of our schools. We want our overall LEA, and then we want to know each school in that LEA. And then the state level report. That's obviously where we'll have like the state average, and then how did each LEA perform. So all those reports will be available to people at different levels. If you're a district administrator, you'd have access to all of those. If you're a classroom teacher, you just have class and individual student. If you're a principal, you'd have your school, and so on, kind of working down the line. So what we kind of need your help with is what's going to be the useful information tidbits for teachers and different stakeholders, principals, parents, yourselves. What do you want to be able to pull in those reports that is already like set up, that you don't have to ask our data folks to develop some new report, like this is the reporting. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to kind of talk through. One, I kind of went over what we're thinking for individual student / parent, because this will affect, all 46,000 kids. Want to make sure we get that part right. But then also digging into these other 4 categories, what are some things you want to make sure we have? The one piece I didn't talk to you about is how are the teachers going to get this individual student level data for their class? So in our programming RFP, we did not put in for like a spreadsheet that teachers could go into and say who didn't get B, lowercase b, but our programmers here can build that. So we're going to make it functional. It sounds like way better than just a spreadsheet, which will be good. Where teachers can go item 1, part B, how many, how did my kids score? Sort the kids that got a 2, 1, or 0, and they can really dig in. Or letter recognition, item 3, who got what letters, who didn't get S, let me sort. I'll pull a little small group in preparation for teaching S and do some pre-work with them. So lots of functionality, because that's where we have gotten some feedback from the field. Teachers want to be able to go down. If they're going to report at the individual item level and every single letter, they should be able to pull that data back out. So that's what we'll work on at the USBE level. So you don't see that here, but we will have that functionality. I've talked with Derek Bradshaw on our IT team, and he's happy. He's like super excited to build it. I was like, great, because we're going to need that soon. So just know that's coming. We want to give teachers all the information back in a functional way, so that it's not 178 lines of code that they have to kind of sort through, but like they pick the item, then it goes into their student level data. So that is kind of just a brief overview. I want to just give you a little bit of time to work together. What kind of data reporting? So not just the data, but how would you like it reported for these different levels of data? So starting at the individual level and then working through the 4 on your sheet. Any questions about your task? All right, get to work, and I'll talk to the people online. Online, if you want to just take notes and send us your feedback, that would be great, so that we can make sure we incorporate anything that you're thinking would be helpful for different stakeholders to be able to have access to. About 3 more minutes, and make sure you're taking notes because it's the only way we'll know what you think. About 30 more seconds just to wrap up. That was a fast 3 minutes, I know. All right, let me give you one example of why we elicit your information and your feedback. Other than to make sure we get this right, we're spending like $110,000 on this, so it's worth spending some time. But Becky's table brought up the idea of parents might think these are the skills we want kids to have at the end of kindergarten, depending on how you've been testing in the past. Like sometimes we used to test like what kids are supposed to get in kindergarten. These are not the skills we want kids to get in kindergarten. They are beyond this by the end. And so representing in some way, although we're asking your kid to count to 20 right now, in kindergarten the expectation is to count to 100. And so representing that up front with some of the key things we'll be measuring and exit, we can definitely put in there like, well, right now we're just asking them to write some letters in their name. Well, by the end of the year, we're going to ask them to write sentences, right? Like it's a very different expectation. So making sure we're clear up front so that parents aren't thinking, oh, well, if we master these things that my kid didn't master, that will be good. That'd be a little scary, right? That's not what we want. So I think that's a great piece that we hadn't considered. So thank you, Becky, for that. I'm sure you all came up with some brilliant things like that. This is why we come to you, because we don't have all the brilliance in the room and we need your help. So make sure somebody hands that in today before you leave so that we can get your information and details. And if you're like, if you don't understand this, call me. Feel free to write your name on there so I know who to reach out to because we'll be meeting with the programmers, I think it's next week, to continue the conversation around reporting. So I'm going to hand things over to Liz. She's going to talk to you about a couple of kindergarten specific things, and then we're moving from KK to K3. Yes, absolutely. It was the graphic artist's way of making it pretty. So whether you're purple or white or blue, like there was no rhyme or reason on the districts. Like if you look at those, it is totally random. The charters, she seemed to go more with like alphabet. Like if you were A, you were this color, and then you went to white, and then you alternated. But the districts don't follow that pattern, and we really tried to get her to change it because it's a little distracting, but she was insistent that it didn't look good the way we wanted it. So we're like, okay, some days you have to let certain battles die. And that was a battle we let die. All right, Ms. Liz.
Good morning. Like Jennifer said, I'm Liz Williams. I'm the kindergarten specialist here at USBE, and I just wanted to talk about a couple of kindergarten specific things. The first one is I sent out an email. It came through this morning from Jennifer about the KSEP grant, the Kindergarten Supplemental Enrichment Program. This is year 2 of the grant. It's a 3-year grant. If your school meets the eligibility criteria, you're more than welcome to apply. At least 10% of your students must experience intergenerational poverty, or 50% of the students in your school are eligible to receive free or reduced lunch. In the email that went out, there was an Appendix A and an Appendix B. Appendix A lists those schools that qualify under the 10% IGP population, and Appendix B lists those schools that qualify under the 50% or more free or reduced lunch population. Your school has to be on this list to receive the grant funding for this year. I know I looked over the list this morning. There were a few schools that were on the list last year that don't qualify based on these percentages for this school year. So make sure you check the current list if you're interested in applying and you're on those lists. Then the next requirements are successful grant application and board approval. We are hoping to have this on the agenda for the March board meeting. So applications are due by February 16th for both renewal and new grant applications. The goal of KSEP is to target those students that are at risk for not meeting third grade core standards in the state. You must use an evidence-based early intervention model. It has a focus on academically improving age-appropriate literacy and numeracy scores, so make sure that you address in your application how you're going to focus on literacy and numeracy. We really push the emphasis of live instruction, so we want to see that most of the money is going to fund teachers or assistants in the classroom that are using live instruction with the students. A requirement is also to administer the KEEP assessments, entry and exit, which 98% of the schools in the state did, so I don't foresee that as being a problem for anyone. And you deliver the program through additional hours or other means. So it's an extended hour of school. It can be 45 minutes. It can be an hour. It can be a whole another half-day session. Or summer school is also an option if that is something that would work for your district. If your school receives early intervention funds, OEK, then you cannot combine KSEP funds with those OEK funds. So if you have schools in your district that are receiving OEK funds, they would not be eligible to use KSEP funds in the same building. You can use local funds to supplant the KSEP funds, just not OEK funds. Any questions about that? If they have received OEK funds in the past and your district decides to shuffle around those funds and give those OEK funds to one school instead of both schools, then that other school could apply and receive the KSEP funding. Does that make sense? Okay.
So a lot of LEAs don't get enough money to even run one full day program, so you might be better off to distribute that money and get more help in one school and then use KSEP to expand services in a different school. We give kind of a flat rate unless you don't, if you're not going to offer a full day program, you can tell us how much money it takes. But is it $40,000? It's 40. We give $40,000. You don't actually ask for money. We just tell you, here's $40,000 if you go with a full day option. If you go with a 45-minute option, then you help us to know, like, well, we're going to get a paraprofessional. It costs this much. Here's how much we need. But in general, $40,000 was pretty good to cover the other half of a teacher's salary, which is what most LEAs, I think all of them but one, have a full day program that we granted last year. One is offering like a supplemental number of minutes every day for students. So just know that's kind of what the range is, but you can distribute your money differently. Although they might have been an OEK school this year, you might move that money to a different school, and this school qualifies based on their free and reduced or IGP population, and we can put some greater services into that school. So that was some clarity from last year that we kind of learned from.
So there are two different applications that came through in the email, so make sure that you are filling out the appropriate one. The first one is for those new applicants. It does look different than the one for the renewals. So if you're already on the grant program, there is the renewal application that is highlighted in green. Excuse me. Yes, if you are currently receiving KSEP funds, you must fill out the renewal application. It is much simpler than the original application that you applied for the grant funding. And like I said, make sure you double check these lists to see that your schools still apply based on the IGP or free and reduced lunch population. And applications are due February 16th, received via email, And all my contact information is on either application. Any questions about KSEP, about the grant application process? We did have a couple of issues where they applied for the grant funding and they received the funding, but they were not able to find a qualified teacher, and they weren't able to, in some instances, make room in their building to shuffle classrooms around, so they didn't have the space. So we thought if we got it out earlier, then you would have more time to make plans and hopefully find those qualified teachers to fill the spots. And then the last thing is I sent out an email about the Kindergarten Here We Come pamphlets. They are upstairs. I will be here at the end of the meeting, so if you would like to pick them up and take them with you today, at the end of the meeting, we can just walk upstairs and distribute those for you. Thanks.
Why, thank you. All right. So and in your handouts, good morning everyone, by the way. In your handouts, you do have the K3 report. So if you want to pull that out, I know we have a lot of paper that we gave you today. And kind of like Jen mentioned earlier, we're actually going to be going over these strategies that she talked about. She showed you the poster, but you also have this handout that describes each one. If you're a little bit less familiar with certain pieces that's possible, or certain strategies, you're welcome to use that as a reminder as well. So we're going to walk through this report just a little bit. So I know at the beginning of the year when we had our first LD meeting, we shared most of the K3 data with you, so a lot of this isn't surprising, but there are certain pieces that we would like to highlight in the report without having you read the entire thing. So what I want you to do is, again, remember to have this handy if you're a little bit less familiar with certain strategies, but what I want you to do is that on page 2, which looks like this is page 2, that very first paragraph that starts with the K3 Reading Improvement Program provides, that very first paragraph I want you to echo read, so just to kind of talk about what that means. So echo reading is when the teacher reads, so I'll be reading a phrase, a sentence, a paragraphic section, I won't be doing the whole paragraph yet, of text aloud, and then you repeat what I read with the same prosody or expression. And so when we're going through this, I'll try to go at a fairly normal pace, and then you're welcome to echo read after me. The K3 Reading Improvement Program provides instructional resources and supports for students in grades K3 to support reading proficiency. Well done. That's hard to do in a big group. You guys did well. A significant support provided by this program includes early reading intervention for students who demonstrate risk for not achieving reading competency. For example, students who do not meet reading competency standards on their first reading test and receive a reading intervention are 7 times more likely to meet reading competency standards on their last reading test than if the student had not received a reading intervention. Well done. So I won't make you do that anymore. The very last paragraph actually on that test that section that starts with overall reading competency rates improved across. So what I want you to do with that section is you're going to duet read. So duet reading is when 2 students, and in this case obviously you're not students, but 2 adults, are reading the same passage aloud together, and the 2 share one text, and the stronger reader, of course you're both strong readers, does the pointing, so you can decide who wants to do the tracking, as 2 students read simultaneously. So again, meet with someone that you think seems friendly and you want to work with. I think you already have a partner 1, partner 2, and partner 1. You can go first this time if you'd like. And go ahead and just duet read that very last paragraph. right? It sounds like most of you are finished with that section. So when you're looking through that, and obviously I understand when you're learning a new strategy of reading, sometimes it takes a little more mental capacity than it would if you were more familiar with duet reading or echo reading. So if you want, you can reread it if you feel the need to. But what I want you to do is compare performance of one grade level, just one, from that paragraph that you got the data of each one and how they performed from beginning to end of year. But compare performance of one grade level from beginning to end. And then what I'll have you do is paraphrase that to partner. So again, just in case you are still finishing up that little piece of duet reading, compare performance of one grade level from beginning to end based on that paragraph that you read, and then paraphrase that to a partner. I'll give you about 20 more seconds. And wrap up your conversations in the next 5 seconds, please. All right, so let's come back together. Hopefully you had enough time to paraphrase that to your partner. So when looking at that, was anyone surprised by any of the grade levels? Yes. Sure. Maybe no experience coming up to kindergarten. Yep. Sure. Correct. Anybody want to guess? It is. So something that we notice between kindergarten and first grade is at the end of kindergarten, sometimes kids even come out and appear like they're doing really well because they're just barking those sounds. But then once they get into first grade and they have to actually do the whole words read, and that actually, is more accountable for that extra piece of the benchmark component. So when thinking about that, I know a lot of first grade teachers notice that the kids then go way down at the beginning of first grade, but it's because they're able to bark the sounds quickly. They're not able to blend them and make them a word. And so it's definitely a big jump that we see. And actually what we see when we look at where the kids come in beginning of year first grade and then end of year first grade is usually a pretty big jump because of that one piece for sure. So what we're going to do is, like I said, I don't want you to have to read the entire report. Oh, of course.
Sorry, this is an area we have work to do, friends. So it's great that they came in and got better. Kindergarten, all kids come in and get better. It's called maturation, right? Like they are getting older, they've been in school, some of these kids have never seen a letter in their lives. There's going to be progress. 9% or whatever it is this year or next year is not sufficient growth for kindergarten. We have to do something different. Part of the legislation changes we'll talk about later is trying to get our state in a place to do something different. Because what we're currently doing is not changing outcomes for kids. If you come in proficient into kindergarten, you will be proficient at the end of third grade. I can almost guarantee it. If you don't come in proficient, you have like a 9-10% likelihood that we will get you to proficiency by third grade. That is dismal. And we work too hard for our data to look like that. You all work too hard for that. So we've got to figure out, and a lot of it comes down to the two topics we talk about today, phonemic awareness and phonics. We are not being as explicit and systematic and cumulative and all of those things that we need to be in that space. We have kindergarten teachers who aren't teaching phonemic awareness because they're like, oh, it's like a 5-minute thing. I don't have time for that. It's the shortest little thing, but it's so critically important. And so we have to get the word out through all of you working. And I know you probably tried to sell this mountain for years. This is not new. None of you are saying, oh, we never did PA. I can do that. None of you are saying this is an easy problem to solve. If it was, we would have solved it already. So just looking at that data, I met with some K2 teachers on Friday, and they came up, a couple of them came up at the end and said, our kids just, you know, they get here and then the beginning of first grade or in the middle of year that goes down, and his first grade teacher is concerned about their data. And I said, well, one of it is the kindergarten problem of barking sounds. Kids should be blending words within like the first 6 weeks of school. Once they have enough letters to make a word, we should be blending. And we are not getting to blending, which is a PA skill, soon enough, it seems to be in kindergarten. So they'll leave at 70%. Well, where do they come in first grade? 63. Well, we don't have that much summer slide. It's honestly a difference between barking sounds and reading words. So when we say barking sounds, you can do nonsense words by just knowing letter sounds, right? You can say n, f, t, s, and never blend a word in your life and score really well on that assessment. It's helping our kindergarten teachers to know in first grade, they're supposed to read words. Well, in kindergarten, your core says emergent reading, which is CBC type words, should be occurring at some point. And we don't seem to be having that message. Kindergarten teachers are the ones to teach kids beginning reading. Sarah's telling me about a colleague who's like, well, the kids get to first grade and the kids were already reading. She's like, that's my job. It's like, no, first grade, your job is to make them read better. Basic reading comes out of kindergarten. So we've got some misconceptions around, and this came out with the keep exit. With our assessment, we had a number of teachers say this is too hard. And I'm going to tell you, it's not exceeding core expectations. It's what the core is asking for, but what our teachers think the core is asking for is not necessarily aligned with what the core really is asking for. So we have to kind of change this understanding of what kindergarten is. We have a hard challenge with half day. I'm not going to lie, like half day is definitely part of the challenge. But it's also, if you spent 5 to 10 minutes teaching phonemic awareness while they're lining up to go to recess, I mean, there's things that we can integrate to make our time more purposeful. You can do rhyming words as they're walking out and say, okay, your exit ticket to recess is a word that rhymes with tap. Think about it, and as they exit, go, go, go. There's little things we can be doing to kind of reinforce concepts too. So kindergarten is a space, and in first grade, we have to do something more strategic. And I think you all are seeing that in your data. Talking with a number of the districts, that's where you're focusing, really is in those early years. We can do a lot in early intervention with reading difficulties if we hit PA and phonics more explicitly in those really primary years. Cash, I'm gonna call you out, or as a prime example. They hit PA and phonics extremely hard in kindergarten and continue in first and second grade. They have very few kids. I think they get close to 90% proficient on dibbles by the end of third grade, and 60-some-odd% proficient on SAGE. Like, there's a good outcome when we hit things early and hard. But I'm not seeing that consistently in our schools. All of your work is around that. You're trying to get people to do that. Like, I don't feel like we have any LEA who's ignoring this skill, but our teachers at the lowest level, the highest level in my mind, are the ones doing the work. It's not always happening at that level. So really looking at our systems, and as I work with that improvement team later today, it's got to be part of the conversation. How do we change the things that we know work that aren't happening in schools? Because our data has been consistently the same. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. So kindergarten attendance, we'll have to look into it. I don't think I know the percentage. Yeah. Yeah. And I think you're absolutely right. So she's saying second grade seems to be like, they're like, well, we'll do some phonics, or at least we'll do spelling. That's phonics, right? In second grade. But the phonics continuum continues K through 5. Like, we get to advanced phonics, but your job is certainly not done by second grade. And our data, what happens in second grade in our data? It's flat, right? Or it goes down, because we aren't hitting those critical skills. The kids haven't mastered all of those phonics patterns quite yet, and they get into more multisyllabic work. We have to do more with it. And so as we talk about what's needed to focus in K1, I think the focus in 2-3 has some similarities, but also some differences around how do we reframe for teachers what your major work is in these grades. Because second grade shouldn't be a year of no growth for kids. Basically, like I've told you before, end of first grade, if you're proficient, we'll see you in third grade. If you're not, we'll see you in third grade, because they will basically be exactly the same kids. And that to me means either intervention, it's really core instruction, right? We should be able to change some of these kids, but our interventions seem to work. I mean, 7 times more likely. You read that in the opening paragraph. 7 times more likely to be proficient if they got intervention. What we're doing in intervention land does not seem to be as big of the problem. It's what's happening during core instruction, because those kids are the revolving door. They go to intervention, you solve their problems, they go back to core, it's not strong enough, and they need intervention again, right? So this kind of revolving door, the can't intervene yourself out of a core instruction problem is possibly part of our space. I'm gonna sit down, it's my soapbox.
Kind of adding on to what Jen was saying, so if we are looking at page 4 in the kindergarten, so we come in with 61% and we leave at 70, and yes, that does look like some really great things. However, if we compare it to nationwide data and kindergartners in the nation, we come in above, so our kids actually come in at a higher level than the nation on average, and then we leave lower. So for some reason, we're coming in up here above the nation, and then we leave lower than that. So just kind of to, have you some thoughts around that as well. If we look at the next page, you can actually see the first, second, and third grade, which we talked about. Of course, we have that 5% jump in first grade. Second grade, we go up 1 at middle of year, and then we go down 2. And then third grade, it's 70, 71, 71, and then 73. So we do go up a little bit on that end piece. And then below that is just the figure of percent of grades. It's 1 through 3 overall the last 5 years, and you'll notice that has also gone down. And then the next page, page 6, we actually have the marginalized groups. So we have low-income minorities, students with disabilities, mobile, and English learners. And if you'll notice, students with disabilities are definitely the lowest group in that section, with EL second. But you'll notice in the 5-year span, they are also going down. So not only is our entire population going down, but so are each of the groups as well. And then that bottom part is the third grade for the last 3 years. And again, we're at 73%, which is the lowest of the last 5 years. Now, the next page, page 7, the results of SAGE. Now that has gone up just a tiny bit each year. So we have good news there with the SAGE. Although when you really think about 49.5%, a little dismal. So we're going up, but not quite where we want to be, and I'm sure all of you would agree with that as well. And then we look at the correlation of DIBELS and SAGE. Now there's actually 2 graphs on this. So the first one, I want to explain this a little bit. So it has school year 14, 15, 16, 17, and again, this is on page 7 if you are wondering where I'm looking. So with that graph, it has the correlation between SAGE and DIBELS, and you'll notice it's a 0.61 or 0.561, 0.57, and so on. So it's actually at the highest in 2017. Now, when we're actually looking at this, we're looking at the yes, no's that you guys tell us. So this is when you respond to the yes, they were benchmark, no, they were not, that reading on grade level, the Rogel column in your SIS system. So what I want you to do is on the bottom of page 7, I want you to chorally read, which if you know what chorally read is in a big group, it's not that fun, so we kept it short. But choral reading is when the entire group, so all of us, read a text out loud together at the same time. So we're going to start with the DIBELS composite scores were reported, and then we'll actually stop at the sentence. It's not the very last sentence, it's the second to last that ends with scale scores on the bottom. So let's go ahead and chorally read that together. Ready? Begin. The DIBELS composite scores were reported to the USBE for the first time in school year 2016. Examining the relationship between students' DIBELS composite scores and SAGE scale scores would produce more precise results. Table 2 illustrates the correlation coefficient for school year 2016 and 2017. Using the DIBELS composite score data correlated with SAGE scaled scores. So if we turn to that second table, that's the table it was talking about. But before that, what I want you to do is go back to that last page where we stopped, and I want you to partner read that very last section on the last page and then the beginning section on this page. So that last part of that last sentence that starts on page 7 and then ending with that top part before table 2 on page 8. And again, this would be partner reading. So this is when 2 students are reading the same text and they take turns reading the passage. So the stronger reader reads a sentence, while the weaker reader follows along. So I'm going to have partner 2 be the stronger reader this time instead of partner 1. So partner 2, you will be the stronger reader this time, and go ahead and partner read that little section, and then we'll talk about table 2. Okay, it sounds like most people are done. So what I want you to do is partner number 2, you were the stronger reader in this scenario. I want you to explain table 2 to partner 1. And then partner 1, I want you to either add any other details that you feel would add to the conversation, or paraphrase if you feel like everything was really included and you don't need to add anything more. So again, partner 2, explain table 2 to partner 1, and partner 1, you can either add details or paraphrase. This one's based on composite score. The other one's just based on yes, no's. And we already know that people report the wrong one.
Ours is just fed in.
That would be smart, wouldn't it? But if only. All right, so let's go ahead and come back together. We had a little conversation over here at the table. So if you're wondering why the correlation is different, because I know that's something we talked about over here. So table 1, that very first table, was just based off of the yes, no's. So however many yeses and no's that you guys report to us in your SIS system that come through Utrex, that's what we based it off of. But then you notice once we brought in the composite score, then it was more accurate. Anyone want to guess why? Room for error, yes. They were supposed to be. They're not. When we get the data, what we notice oftentimes now that the last couple years have been able to actually get the composite data, we notice that not everyone is reporting that if they are at benchmark according to the composite, they don't always mark a yes, or they don't always mark a no if it's not. And it's supposed to be correlated. It's supposed to be the same. So the yes is supposed to only be represented if they met benchmark for that grade at that time of year. The no is if they didn't. So if their composite was green, they were a yes. If their composite was anything else, they are a no. So what we're noticing is those yes, no's don't match. So now that we can gather that data, we can just go ahead and know, oh, that's not right, that was incorrect. But before that, we didn't know. We didn't know because we didn't gather those composite scores. So does that help a little bit about why it's more correlated now that we have more accurate data, basically? I'm so glad you brought that up. I didn't even pay her to say that. So she was asking, does that explain the past years of how they were higher? The question is we don't really know, right? Because we didn't have that accurate composite score data. We don't know. Could it be a factor? Sure, absolutely. Something to think about though, for sure. The next section, table 3, is all of your UG. I think you all got an email from me, so you're probably all very aware of what that is. And then what I want you to do is turn to page 11. Page 11 is after the UG section. And it's the effective reading intervention. So this is the bigger part that was really kind of hashed out more recently in the report. So if you go down to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the 4th paragraph that starts with table 5. Well, it says table 5. It's not an actual table, but it starts with the words table 5. I want you to read that paragraph and the second paragraph through whisper reading. And if you look at that strategy, it's the very last one on your descriptor sheet. And so it's when all students in class are reading a passage and each one is whispering the passage at their own pace. And if students finish reading, they can go ahead and start back over and read it again until everyone is done. So I will let you know when we're done. And this will allow you to each read it at least once, and some of you might even be able to read it twice in that amount of time. So again, you're reading, let's see, 1, 2, 3, the 4th and 5th paragraph on page 11 in a whisper voice. You may begin. All right, so I think most of you probably got done with this. So what I want you to do is partner 1. So we're going back to partner 1 again. Partner 1, give a 20-second elevator speech to the power of intervention. And then partner 2, I want you to give your own 20-second speech. Go ahead, partner 1. All right, so I think most of you probably got that 20-second elevator speech done and given your speech. And hopefully you did notice that 7 times more likely is, that's pretty exciting to see. Now, I know we talked about a little bit how the yes, no's when we talked about composite scores, and those don't always link. Do we feel that the yes, no's for intervention are always marked accurately? So we're like, I don't want to say it, but no. So I'll give you an example. We know that they're not always marked accurately. We had a school, whatever SIS system they were using, and I apologize, I don't remember which one it was. It might have been their own that they created, I'm not sure. But that specific LEA failed in the past when I first started here. So then we looked at their students, we looked at the data, and it said that not one child received intervention. And I thought, that seems a little strange. I bet that's not true. It's not. They left it empty. And if you leave it empty, it automatically goes to a no on their SIS system. Now, again, we all have, I don't even know how many SIS systems are out there now. So that could also be an issue, that if one was left empty, it could be an extra no that really shouldn't have been there. There could be some yeses that are marked. I know there are some schools that mark yes for everyone. Not everyone should be getting intervention because not everyone needs it, right? That's be like everyone gets medication when we don't all need it. So kind of thinking about those pieces, we can only report on the accuracy or the accurate data that you guys give us. And so we want to assume that's accurate, even though we know based off of conversations that we've had and data issues that it's not always. So I don't know who fills that out for your districts. I know for every LEA it's completely different. So whoever fills that out, just really reiterating how important it is to make sure those yes, no's for intervention and for composite score, which we know how that's changed a little bit this year, but kind of think about how important that is and that we do report it, and it is in these reports that go to the board and the legislatures and that we share with all of you. Did you want to say something because you're standing up?
So this report, the reason we're sharing with you is it's going to the Hill this week, which will, if they read it before session, it could cause some questions about the program of K-3 reading improvement. We put the intervention thing in the very first paragraph and ended with it for a particular reason. We want to highlight what is working, which is intervention, right? The fact that kids are 7 times more likely to become proficient is huge, and that's where your money is spent, is primarily on intervention supports. So in terms of as we communicate with the legislature and you talk with your superintendent, this is a bright spot you can highlight so they have a talking point as to how these dollars are being used in a positive way to impact students. Because we continue have to have that dialogue. When you look at SAGE data, when you look at Dibble's proficiency, when you look at what your kids are reading at Alexile that's proficient at the end of 3rd grade, our numbers are not great. But we do have some things that are working, and we don't want to lose the things that are working to try and revamp everything. So intervention land is a happy place in what you guys are doing. It's a place that's working. When I came on, it was 6 times more likely. Last year was 7, and this year continues to be 7. So we're being able to sustain that, if not even improving on it a little bit. So consistently over time, this has been an outcome that we've seen. We all know the data is as true as we can be. None of you are like faking the data out there. It's what you're putting in. So we take what we have, but every year we get better with the data. I feel like we learn things. Everyone's like, oh, that's new information. I mean, when I came on, you all had yes, no, whatever you wanted to do. I mean, that was when I started 3.5, 4 years ago. Yes, no, it's whatever you chose it to be. We've changed that dramatically to be the composite score. And this year you don't even enter yes, no if you are directly have a vendor with us. So that should really clean it up because it's truly just based on composite, where before it was teacher experience, other tests, all of that. In the time I've been here, we've morphed significantly in that way. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Our data might be getting more accurate, and it could be causing our data to look worse than it actually is. We actually could have been worse. We don't have it in there because you don't want to say that your data is bad. But when we have those conversations, well, the thing about kids getting not as well performing is that it increases the need to do something, right? It increases people's motives to invest. There's positive framing around K-3. The legislature thinks they hear from people all the time, like this is a super positive program. We just need to sell like interventions working within that space. But as we look at the data, there is potential, and that's the hard part, because you all have been reporting on this since 2011 in some way. We've gotten better and more accurate, which could yield this negative, but we don't really know because we aren't able to go back historically and check for that. So it's one of those, if we look at the last 2 years, those are probably our most accurate, right? 16, 17, because we can use composite scores to determine. And 18 will give us a 3rd year. Eventually those early years where you guys were marking all kinds of things will fall off, which will be good because it does make this kind of painted picture, because we were representing ourselves with the knowledge and the kind of guidance we were given at the time. That guidance has changed over time. As you, if any of you have been here a number of years, we are not doing things the same way any year. Everything kind of morphs just a little bit, and that causes some issues in the data. So it might be helpful to add a line in there like the data collected changed in terms of what was reported every year and could potentially be yielding who knows what kind of distortion on the data. I would assume we're doing better than we used to be in some ways if we were truly reporting benchmark status, because we weren't, as you know, back in the day when I came, that was not the case. And so it was a mixed bag. And so that data may have been inflated, and now we're more at the true where our kids are starting point. So as you just talk, these reports get shared, the board approved it already in terms of like your superintendent, keep them aware because they're the ones playing on the Hill this session that need to be ready with the elevator speech of why K-3 is important. Because it's going to come up this year, guaranteed. We have a couple other things we'll share with you here in a minute. It will be a conversation point, and your superintendents have to be prepared for that conversation, and they have tons of programs that they are overseeing. So if you have their ear or you have the director who has their ear, start having those conversations so that they have some talking points of why this program is so critical for your LEA. Because I think you all feel that way from talking with you in the past, but your superintendents may need to just have some talking points to help them be able to persuade someone who's on the fence of whether this is a good idea or not. But we've learned a lot, and I think you're right, Becky, it could be a totally distorted point of view at this time. I mean, that data is what we had. I agree. I love it.
And kind of to add to that, I'm so glad you brought that up because we have discussed that numerous times. But there is a line in there that talks about, in this year we did start collecting composite scores so the data would be more accurate. But again, it's that one line. And when you just look at the graph, which is possibly something that someone's doing, it doesn't paint the same picture, right? That we all know to be possibly true. And since we don't know if that's included or not, we can't really say, yep, we think that's it. So it is a tricky thing, but it's definitely a talking point that you would want to share. So when looking at the next piece, the literacy block grant, which I know Jen talked about that last time, but oh, you need me. Oh, what are you doing over here? Okay. Oh, and we're good. So these potentials. So I know last time we talked, and I'm sure if any of you went to that board meeting where Jen and I presented or listened in, because I know you have nothing better to do. They're so exciting. But kind of thinking about this, what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to harm any LEAs, right? So we didn't want to like completely take away your OEK or whatever by changing the funding stream. So what we did instead is we have two options now. Of these two options, and again, we have that class size reduction still kind of highlighted in different color because we don't really know if that would be included or not, but if it does, that would be really great. But thinking of it, basically, the way you're getting these two funds didn't change. So however much approximately that you're getting year to year on these two programs would stay the same because we didn't want to harm any LEAs. The early intervention software, then instead of being that we send it out, we would just give it out to you guys. Now what would change is between these two, and again, we didn't want to harm anyone in this section as well. But what would change is the two options. When we look at those two options, continuing that other funding as a status quo so that wouldn't destroy any of your current programs. And with that K3 software distributed, we could either decide, now Jen sent this out. We didn't do it in a printout because it's a spreadsheet and we all know how well those print out with the tiny, tiny font if you want to put it on one sheet. So they are in your file folder that you all got today in the Google Drive. But option or scenario 3 or scenario 8 was the K3 population. So it was based on how many kids you have in K3 in your LEA. And then scenario 9 was with risk factors. So you'll notice some of your LEAs are going to get a little bit more if you have more risk factors in that scenario than you would in scenario 8. So when you kind of think about that, that might be something you want to look at. But again, basically what this would mean is no LEAs would be harmed and that everyone would get more money. So hopefully that's something that you would all be in agreement with. We're looking at some proposed changes because if in fact this literacy block doesn't go through, which is certainly a possibility. Oh.
So for the funding, we've been told it's basically going to come up in executive appropriations and public ed appropriations in the first few weeks of session. It's going to be its own kind of determination along with all the other, should this go in the WPU type conversation. So it'll happen in the big kind of appropriation meetings. So it won't be really, because it's for 2019, remember it's not going to affect next year. Next year is status quo, but if this does go through, it'd be for 19. So you can kind of keep tabs on it. I'll send you out updates as we get them and hear about them, of course, just those of you that don't pay attention to the Hill every day. I'll send you out things if it's starting to come up or if it's going to be heard on a particular agenda. This will happen within the first couple of weeks because it basically sets the rest of the budget for education, and so it will have to occur pretty early, whatever that conversation ends up being. So that's what I was told from the superintendency. It'll be in those two appropriation committees and kind of their decision on whether the literacy block kind of weaving goes through and which parts get weaved in. Obviously, the vendor piece is a little hot topic. It depends on how much the vendors have been out canvassing, which they've been very active. So we'll see what that looks like, Karen. Executive appropes and public ed appropes. It'll be in those two. That's where the decisions will be made. So we'll keep you apprised, but I just wanted you to know, like, this is coming. Our board was going to vote last board meeting on option 5, which I sent them a very lengthy email saying why that may not be a good idea, and we had some new options that we sent them. So as far as I know, they didn't end up voting on an option yet. Option 8 and 9 really keep you at status quo and just add the software money. So that's probably the easiest way to explain it to your superintendent. Whether you want to go risk factors or not, you can see the difference in how much money you would get. But what we learned from options 1 through 7 was it cut into everybody's amount because OEK is not funneled that way. It is funneled very differently when you don't have all schools getting it, right? It's only a certain amount and you have to be this certain percentage. So we kept all the funding formulas the same. So you basically got your same K3, based on your free and reduced lunch populations, your same OEK, and we just threw in software. Class size reduction, I talked with Terry Shoemaker, who's like the superintendent's board person, and he was not so excited about that going into literacy. He's like, that's funding we already use for lots of things. It probably needs to stay in that space. So I don't think the superintendents, from his perspective, would be behind the class size reduction. But there hasn't been a whole lot of pushback on weaving these if nobody's hurt. And so that was our challenge, was to come up with a model that allowed you to kind of sustain your current programming, but get the benefit of the software dollars being sent to you, whether you continue with software or choose to spend those in a different strategy. You would see the increase in funding. So the spreadsheet shows you, look at option 8 and 9. And we'll talk why not to look at 10 and 11 here in a minute, but 8 and 9 will be your kind of focus points if you want to look at that and have conversations with your superintendent around where we're probably going to suggest the board have a conversation around. Our board seems more leaning towards risk factors at this point. We have a number of board members that are really think that's where the space should be, so just keep that in mind. 9 is probably more their preference, but currently everything we fund is on that number 8, kind of that K-3 population, just your total numbers of students. But for example, like a Paiute, all of their kids are IGP, so they would see risk factor would be, yep, all of the children versus the 19 kids that might be coming into kindergarten or whatever. So it's a little bit different how your funding forms out, and it changes more significantly depending on how big your LEA is, obviously, and how many risk factors you have. But just for your more the legislative lens on that. Oh, we'll talk about that here in just a second with the levy. Her question was, is there anything with the levy? We're going to talk about that.
So one of your handouts today you also received was the current legislation that we have around K-3 reading, the 53A 17A-150. So like I said, if the literacy block doesn't, if it all goes to the WPU, whatever, K-3 reading still needs to change. I think we can all agree, look at the data, that a change is needed. So it's not a ton of things, but we kind of wanted to walk you through what those changes would be. So in section 4, so it's on that very first page. I highlighted mine just to make it a little bit easier to see if you're far away, but section 4 is right about here, almost midway down. But that section 4, you'll notice what we wanted to change. Instead of just reading and being based on reading, we wanted to really look around literacy and all of those pieces that, of course, are combined and they're all in the core. So the PA, phonics, fluency, comprehension, vocab, oral language, and writing, instead of, again, just based on reading, we wanted to rate it on all of those things. Also, a change would be interventions aligned to the student needs, because right now, of course, it's just intervention, but we want to make sure that that intervention is aligned to the student's need or deficit. Professional development for teachers and interventionists. Right now, it just says teachers, but I think you all know that you often include interventionists in that PD as well. And then assessments that support adjustments to core and intervention instruction. So using it in those manners. So that's kind of a little bit of revision of section 4. Not a huge amount of revision, just a little bit here and there. It gets a little bit different in the continued on of section 4. So right now, as you all know, our UG, our growth goal, is 47.83%. So we would be proposing a growth goal for each LEA with a minimum threshold of 60 across grades 1 through 3. Now, I want to be really clear. What we don't mean is we would check grade 1 at 60, grade 2 at 60, grade 3. We would use grades 1, 2, and 3 as a large cohort, basically, and see if all of them together are meeting that goal of 60 or not. So it wouldn't just be 3rd grade anymore, which would probably make your 3rd grade teachers a little bit happier. But it would actually include the grades before that. And obviously thinking about when we looked at our data and looked at where some of those issues are, having 3rd grade just try and clean that up is really pretty unfair. So trying to make it a little bit better. This might even help in charter schools, since you usually have some charter schools have 17 kids. This is only based on 17 kids. Now they'd have maybe, 3 times that number. So it'd be a little bit better for them as well. And then you may not know this, but there is a growth goal in SAGE. And when we looked at that, there's an LEA, for example, that has a 3.7%. And we thought, well, if we move that up, I don't know what we'd move it to, because we have a wide range of SAGE scores. So we would actually remove that growth goal, as right now that's not even included in your UG anyway, unless some of you are like, no, I really want my SAGE included in UG. Anyone? I didn't think so. Okay. So we just took it out. And then sections 5 through 11, which starts towards the bottom, and I highlighted just to kind of give you a general idea of where that starts. So sections 5 through 11 is still on the first page. So we would want to maintain the same funding formulas just to keep that status quo that you're already having, except the levy, the really just not even existing anymore anyway. Replace that levy with the one-to-one district match. So for example, if your district is getting $1 million, we would expect that you match $1 million. So it's not that different from what you're doing now. And actually, when I read through your UCAs, I notice a lot of you actually match above and beyond what we give you, which, thank you. That's so wonderful to see. But that would be something that would be included. And you'll notice again, this says district match. So all the charter schools that are sitting down right now and freaking out and thinking, oh my gosh, we have to match the 20,000 or whatever, however much you get. No, it would just be district. So just so you are aware of that as well. And then section 12, which if you turn back, section 12 begins right about here on page 3. So if that's a little bit helpful, I know it's not the easiest thing to find it. But things that we would add, and I hope you all enjoy this, but scientifically or evidence-based intervention curriculum. In other words, not Pinterest and teacher pay teachers. So hopefully you all enjoy that very much. I see some yeses going around, which is exciting. And then literacy assessment that identifies student learning needs to monitor their learning progress. So this would be like diagnostic assessments that you may or may not have in your LEA currently. That would be really helpful to really dive down and find out what's really going on with that student and where the deficits really lie. And then section 14 and 15, and I hope this gets you really excited as well. This is a little bit further down on page 3. So the annual report progress for growth goal would be grades 1 through 3. So obviously that would be a little bit different, but again, it would be in the cohort. The board will establish a system of support for LEAs that fail. So notice it says system of support instead of we take away your money. Hopefully you like that. So instead of just after you fail for 2 years, we just take away money and do nothing, which seems oh so helpful. We would actually establish a system of support. And so we would figure out a way to help that LEA or LEAs that are failing and figure out a way to support them. And year 1 would be like, we basically want you to try and figure it out on your own. We'd help with a little bit, but it'd be pretty minimal. If you fail 2 years in a row, it would be a little bit more support. And then 3 years and on, it would be a lot of support because it's not really getting done. And, oh, yep. Great question. So, and in case for those of you online that couldn't hear her question, she was asking where would the money come from this level of support. So obviously you all know right now this is me, right? There's one person. So that's probably a little problematic if we go to the 60 because we would have 17 LEAs fail and 3 of them would be very large districts and the rest would be charters. Knowing that there's only me, I would just have to do the rest of my job never. So I don't think that would really work out. So we would try and figure out to add at least 1 to 2, depending on how many really fail, since this wouldn't be till a while yet, to add some FTEs. So what we would do is it would be up to 3% of the funding, depending on what funding, how many streams get brought in, whatever, but it would be up to 3%. If it's not needed, then we wouldn't go all the way to 3%. It's just whatever would be needed. So just to kind of give you a heads up on that as well. Thank you so much for asking that. It is overall. Yep, great question, Becky. And in case you didn't hear that online, she asked, would that be overall or just the ones that failed? And it would be overall. Oh.
So for the up to 3, it will be whatever types of support. So it doesn't have to be FTE. It might be we need an external evaluator, or we determine we need to do something different and bring a presenter in. Whatever that looks like, that gives us some broad strokes. So we just basically put up to 3% used by the board for whatever level of support's necessary, that we would collaborate with the LEA to say, okay, we've spent, the first year really doesn't cost a lot of money. Like it's really just a little technical assistance, see what we're doing, help you evaluate your program, and you guys change. Year 2 does start to have some costs. Year 3 would definitely have some costs associated. So that's where we're adding. This particular year, our goal is to get growth into K3, but this is not the year to do it. Because if we change the bill and you try and get growth and the bill fails, or the growth, because of the growth, the bill doesn't get changed. So our focus this year is to get the bill changed and then next year come back for growth, so that it's built in, because we've never had growth in K3 and it needs to be in place. So this year is really focusing on changing the legislation to get to a happy place of not having the failure in some of those elements. But if we tagged on growth on top of it, we could lose out on changing the bill just due to the fiscal note associated. So next year we'll come back and ask for growth for K3 reading through our board and through the legislature. So just so you can kind of see the forward-thinking plan on that.
And so because we would want to go to a more supportive instead of a take away your funds model, Section 15 would be removed. So that would be the whole, if for 2 consecutive years you fail, we take away your money. So that would be removed as well. Oh, no. No, I appreciate your questions. They're all very good.
Like on your beginning part for the block, the K3 and the OEK, are those being maintained separately within the block? The amount of money going to K3 and the amount going to OEK? Or would it be up to an LEA to combine those 2 funding sources and use them how they want to?
Our recommendation is they stay dispersed the way they are. I'm not sure how it actually fiscally runs out. So what we've proposed is saying we would like them just to stay like your K3 funnel, your OEK funnel for those, and then that software can be just you choose which pile or whatever other strategy you want. What we might have to do is that first year the literacy block goes through, and the second year we come back and say how we're going to want to tag those funds. Like this percentage needs to go to this and this needs to go to that, so that you could have those lines still drawn in the sand if that's what the stakeholders want. I'm not sure where you guys lie in terms of, do you want to make all the decisions? Because that's honestly the point of literacy block, is to, yes, I know some of you are very passionate about of keeping those lines drawn in the sand, right? So although the money might be weaved together, so it's coming, there might be constraints on that money saying, well, 70% needs to go to K3, you can use up to 30% for OEK, and blah, blah, blah. So that's where I think we can put some constraints on it, because that was definitely, when we talked last time, was definitely the recommendation that came out from the vast majority of you. Like, we need some constraints. Otherwise, it's all going to go to OEK, or we're going to lose out on other strategies. OEK is a good strategy, but it's not the only strategy we need to be employing. So starting to have that conversation, I'm not sure in terms of like how the public ed approach will frame it, but what we can come back to is, because it's not till 19, is to then put some parameters on how that literacy block grant is spent, and allow for some of those percentages that we talked about in November to be put into place. This initial session will honestly just be budget. There will be no conversation, because we're going to have to combine all the bills next year if this goes through, right? Like OEK, early intervention, K3, all of those will have to come together into one bill to make sense to go with this literacy block. And at that point, we can put some constraints on the money in whatever recommendations you think see fit. Because currently, I think when I calculate, it wasn't like 20% going to OEK right now out of the big bucket or something. 25%. So something to where we maintain programs, because we don't want to stumble you from doing what you currently do, but allow you to maybe go a little bit above that if you want to expand OEK, but not so far that you start losing your benefits to the K3 literacy space, and hopefully over time the K6 literacy space. That's kind of where we see projection. This year will just be the mingling of money, maybe. We're just hoping not to get in the WPU. Like, we can sustain funding the way it is and be fine. But if it goes WPU, that's the scary part. This is kind of the way to avoid WPU is kind of how I see it. So not optimal, because what we have right now is working in its little funding streams. But to avoid WPU, the literacy block is our better avenue than like saying, oh, we just want everything to remain the same. That's doesn't seem to be selling. So it's kind of our worst case, best case scenario type setting of where we're kind of standing. Does that help? I know the legislature, it's going to be a hot mess this year, guys. I'm going to warn you. Like, Sarah and I are like, it's going to be so much fun. We have more to tell you. There's more coming, so get ready. I'm next. Okay, you should log back in, because I've been out for about 15 minutes. All right, so for K3, there is one other scary part on the horizon that we might need you to be an uprising for later on. We kind of got word about this in November. It went quiet, came back in December, went quiet again, so we just kept thinking it was dying. It just keeps going away. But it came back up last week, and we're like, oh, okay. So supposedly there's a draft that we're going to hopefully get our hands on. Senator Stevenson is proposing to get rid of Dibbles and switch to another assessment. Yep. Let me let you take that in. We have spent years getting to the point that I feel like Dibbles is finally valued in this state for most people. I'm not going to say we're 100% by any means, but we have spent a long time getting to this place that we are currently in, which to me, compared to where I came in 3.5 years ago, is a happy place. Like, we have made significant leaps and bounds, especially with pathways of progress and being able to use our data. But there is this kind of assumption that it doesn't align well with the core. I would disagree. Our SAGE correlation highly suggests that it is not the case. So we will come out with some talking points that we probably will share with you directly of, if this bill comes to fruition, things to say as to why we don't need to change the assessment. Now, if you feel differently, we need to have a conversation. My feeling from you all is Dibbles is working to some level. I mean, there's always room for improvement. But to totally switch, my anticipation of what they want to switch to is a 3-hour diagnostic assessment on the computer. Okay, each child. So this is me just knowing the vendor system and who Stevenson's working with. I have a feeling that's where this is headed, okay? So within that context, it will be very easy for you to have a talking point without Jennifer. Like if I just tell you how long this new assessment will take compared to the 5-8 minutes you're doing in Dibbles, you'll have a really good talking point, okay? These are K3 kids. No child needs to be mandated a 3-hour reading screener assessment. So that is the scary space we're in right now. I'm hoping to get, I got another email today on it, hoping to get a little connected with the legislative analyst who's drafting this bill this week, and I will get more information out to you as I'm allowed. When things are in draft form, they're not able to be discussed, so I don't know anything right now. But as soon as it comes out, I can release it to you, but I will have some talking points to help you facilitate some conversations at your local level to decide, is this good or bad for us? And we'll represent both sides. Like if we switched, here's the benefits, here's the differences between the two tests. We've invested a lot of time and money in Dibbles the last few years in terms of professional development, trying to get more people. We have every school district in the state except for one on a system. That is amazing when it's not mandatory that you choose a state system. Like there's a lot of things that tell me you all are seeing some value in the system we have. I worry about that much time being spent in an early reading assessment for this young of student. And so we'll share with you what we know, but I kept hoping it was just gonna go away because they just never came to meet with us. Like they kept trying to schedule and they just kind of let it fall. And then last week it haunted me again. So now that session is close, I'm sure we're getting closer to that piece. So as soon as I know some details, I will get you out some talking points around what's coming so you can prep your superintendent. And at this point, I need to take a little feedback. Am I off base that Dibbles, we're okay with Dibbles? Like, give me a thumbs up or thumbs down. Like, no, we would love a new assessment. Now, if it's a good option, then it will be a different talking point. But my perception of what's coming is a software-based program that's going to give you an assessment and tell you where you are, which is great for some kids. We do not need to screen all students with that long of a diagnostic assessment. I'm pretty sure I know which vendor it is, and they've proven that, hey, if you are proficient in our software, you're proficient on SAGE. Well, we can say that with Dibbles, and it's a much shorter assessment. It doesn't take 3 hours to give, and it's not, Dibbles is a screener, right? It's a risk thing. It's not telling you what's wrong, where this test would actually get down to like the diagnostic level, supposedly, and tell you what's wrong. But not all kids have something wrong to diagnose. And just because you can, if you're proficient in their test, doesn't mean their software is going to get you proficient in the test to be proficient on SAGE. So that makes sense. So it's more of a vendor-driven thing from what I can tell. But so you can already use your money for that, and we're doing some clearer stuff there in the bill just to make sure like you could potentially get a system like that if you want, but for all kids to take it when you have 60, 70, 80, depending on your district, kids proficient, why would you want to spend that kind of time telling you what you already know? That's my challenge with it. And for something that I'm at a loss on it. It will come up soon, but my dreams at night are like this little T-chart of like why and why not to send to you, to share with your whoever needs to be your stakeholders feedback, because it won't be me that can be leading the charge unless the board comes out against it, which probably won't happen. So it'll have to be you all taking up the torches. Yes. So we're hoping, because right now Dibbles is, we have 2.1 million in Dibbles right now, but to serve 200,000 students with 2.1 million with a software that does that kind of work, I don't think that's the funding. But Stevenson's very successful at getting money for things that he wants. So just be aware. It might be great, who knows, but my apprehension is that it's not so great, that I have a feeling I know what it is and I'm not super excited about it. So, yeah. Yeah, whether they're engaged in it. Yeah. For the youth that we're looking at, I think that's a good valid point too. So when I send it out, if you have other talking points that I don't bring, feel free to send them back to me and I'll make a more comprehensive list. Because I think it's going to be helpful if we can have reasons and we're consistent with our reasons as to why this may not be a great idea. And maybe it is. Maybe when it comes out, you'll be like, yeah, totally behind it. Great. My fear is that it's what I think it is and it's not a positive thing necessarily. All right, so in terms of future legislation, we'll talk early reading software later. There is one more thing. So we have K3 being revised. It'll be an amendment. We are renaming it. It won't be K3 reading. It'll be, what do we call it, Early Literacy Initiative Program or something. ELIP, I think is our acronym. Sarah was very excited about that. So just know we are renaming it because K3 Literacy 1, over time, we'd like to see the K6 happen. The legislator we're working with right now thinks that will dilute the focus on K3 if we expand to K6 right now. So we weren't able to convince quite yet. So we're going to stick with the K3 for now, but if we call it early literacy and eventually get it to a grander space, we don't have to change the name necessarily. And so Early Literacy Initiative Program, the ELIP, will be the new amendment that you'll see, but it's really the K3 reading piece. So when things come out, when they're actually drafted and released and they're able to be released to the public, I will send them to you so you don't have to be looking for them. But if you do track bills, it might be one that you'll want to track. Because it's late, we would have ended up with a bill number in like the 1200s. And if you know anything about the legislature, they don't often get all the way up there. So luckily the legislator we're working with had an earlier bill number that they were able to trade out our bill for a bill they didn't actually need, and so we got a much lower bill number. So we are safe in that sense. Those of you that know legislation, we're at 1,100 bills already. Like, they don't always all get heard even. So getting an earlier bill number really does matter because we're late in the game to kind of change legislation. So, but we figured this is the year if literacy block is happening with our data, we could have these kind of more critical conversations and do some more work at the board level. So the board, it's a lot of vague language in the ELIP. There'll probably nothing that you'll be like, huh, that's a horrible idea, because it's really vague. Where the specificity will come is when we build board rules. So for example, the growth goal or how failure will work, those will all be established by the board, and that's where you guys will have some voices in what that looks like. So like Sarah and I will do some drafting and then bring it to you for feedback and preparation for the board so that we can make sure we have some good stakeholder input and buy-in, hopefully. So just know the bill's pretty vague, and that we left it that way for a reason, to make sure we can add the specificity at the more controlled local level so that we can amend it as we go, oh, we thought that was smart, and then it wasn't so smart, and let's change that now. It's really hard to do in legislation. And as you all know, when you open K3, there is the risk of losing K3, right? That's why we've hesitated all these number of years to go back and revise anything, because it brings attention and to something that is currently just under the radar. So that's always one of the concerns around opening the bill. So that's just so you're all aware. We'll keep you apprised on the early reading assessment, DIBEL's potential change, as well as the Early Literacy Initiative Program. And then I'll talk to you about early reading software here in a minute because it has some changes as well. We're gonna go to some bright spots because I feel like we've been doing so much like sad day information that let's highlight some things that are actually working and going well. So I am part of a group from the elementary reading network. I always want to call it the early reading network because we focus on K3. But it's really led by Karen's team in Granite, United Way, and Canyons has recently joined for the after school program part. But I think they're out this year from what I have heard. There's been a couple things we've been doing with them, and you have a handout in your packet that looks like this, or online, for those of you online. Summer school, we've been piloting stuff. They've been doing summer school in Granite for years. And at one point, United Way got involved and say, hey, let's do some piloting of what might work better in summer school to prevent the summer slide and get kids ready for the coming school year. So this was the plan that Janelle and her team worked on kind of developing around. They have 90 minutes in summer school that they were going to spend dedicated to literacy. And how is that time going to be spent and broken out? So this is a little sample. Janelle, have you guys changed it at all since this version? It looked pretty good? Okay. So this is the kind of version we've been using the last couple of years in their summer school programs. And the data I'm going to show you is why I'm showing you this template is because it seems to have some impact. Now, it's not the only factor in their summer school programs, but when you look across the grade spans and who's using this particular model, there are some better outcomes. And I'm sure Karen and Janelle, if you want to add some things when we kind of talk through this, you're more than welcome to. So I just wanted to kind of share with you in terms of this K-3 literacy block, something that maybe as you look at your own literacy blocks in your district, do you have some of these things represented? Because the data I'll show you here in a minute, it's pretty significant how much these kids are growing in a short amount of days of summer school in comparison to their peers who didn't attend summer school, obviously, but that had some similar skills. So top, look at that, phonemic awareness, 5 minutes, okay? So they're all spending a little time in phonemic awareness land. Then you move into fluency. With text, getting kids to actually read text. We've got, and fluency also has some of that phonics potentially built in depending on what they're working on and what grade level. Then it moves into kind of close reading and vocabulary and comprehension work, and then moves into small group rotations. And these are, needs-based. They do their diagnostic pieces, figure out which kids need what phonics skills, and they use their computer adaptive software as one of the stations. And generally they try and have another para so that the kids are either with a para, the teacher, or the computer. They're never on their own during the small group summertime, if possible. And this is what they work on in those groups. So that's kind of how this functions and how it's been set up. And basically this template was based on what research says around how much time you should be spending in things. Now, obviously this does not get anything into writing. There's no writing development during this particular piece. They will do writing as part of like the close reading. They might have them do summary statements or that kind of thing, but there's not like actual instruction necessarily on how to write better. So that's just the summer school pilot programming. Here are the results. So let me explain them to you. This is this past summer's. So just kind of reading the table. Here's all grades kind of combined, then K, 1, 2, 3. I left 4 or 5 off because they're not using the literacy block grant, and I'll talk about that here, or the literacy block framework. These are kids that didn't attend summer school, what their average Lexile gain over the summer was, versus the kids who attended summer school. The average number of days attended at summer school was 13. So it's not like they went very long. Some of the sessions were longer, but when they actually attended, how many days? So the average was 13 days. This p-value, for those of you that are statistically not versed, I have joined you on some days, but at this point, anything below a 0.05 in education is seen as being statistically significant. That didn't just happen by chance. So this negative 16, that would be like putting a bunch of zeros in front, right? So very significant. And then all the other ones are statistically significant. So looking across all grades, the average kid in K through 3 gained 83.5 Lexiles over the summer, and the kids who attended summer school gained 105. But moving across the grades, you'll see some different growth rates, like a 30 difference here. So these are kindergartners going into first grade. This would have been first graders going into second grade, second graders, and third graders. So for summer school, for 13 days of average instruction, to have that kind of Lexile difference in a statistically significant way yields that maybe they have something figured out in summer school. So if any of you have summer school programmings, I might encourage you to chat with Granite, specifically Karen or Janelle, about their programming. They're looking to expand pilot sites, if you have funding on your own, of course, to be able to continue to see this potential and to limit the summer slide for kids. So just something you might be interested in. Worst case, you might benefit from just looking at how they ran their literacy block, because it does seem to be working. Grades 4 through 5, I didn't put up here for a couple reasons. One, they're not part of the project. We focused on K3, so they didn't use the literacy block. But the kids in 4-5 actually got worse going to summer school. Okay, so, and they weren't great results. So some of the things are, these teachers got training, right? They got professional development on the literacy block. They got professional learning around these components in preparation. Not a lot. I think it was, 6 hours of training? Yeah, I mean, it's not like a significant amount of training, but there was some. But the 4th, 5th graders didn't have the results, and some of that goes back to the training that was involved, the teacher set, but also this. They didn't have the literacy block. They just did whatever they normally would do in summer school, which you know all what that looks like in some settings. This seemed to help. Now, we would structure it a little bit different, obviously, for your 4 or 5, because they wouldn't need phonemic awareness necessarily in some of those. But a lot of the components would remain very similar in a 4 or 5 block. So if you're interested, I would suggest chatting with Karen. United Way kind of runs this with them as well, so they can be of some support possibly. But from an instructional lens, Granite's the one really leading that work. So summer school, just some highlights of good things. The other thing I wanted to highlight with you is dyad reading. So we've got a couple good pilots going on this year. One is down in Washington County with about 15 of Nadine's teachers down there. And then we have Granite doing some work in their after-school programs as well as in some of their classrooms. So you have a handout that just explains what dyad reading is. And we've done this before. I think we trained you last fall, like 2 years ago fall, on dyad reading. So I'm just kind of bringing it back to refresh your memories, to kind of think, as we look at next year or your after-school programs, are there ways to improve what they're doing to have some outcomes? So dyad reading is that where the 2 kids sit side by side, they're strategically partnered, they read for 15 minutes in a Lexile book that's 2 to 3 grade levels above their current reading level, sharing one text, okay? And it basically supports the struggling reader to read more challenging text with the support of a peer, right? And when we looked at the data, it provides this multi-sensory experience. And this is something in terms of the instructional strategies we showed you today, they're listed on that sheet from most scaffolded to least. So when I read to you this morning, who did the bulk of the heavy lifting? Me. I did the bulk of the reading. You chimed in every once in a while. It improved engagement, but it put your eyes on text and you saw and heard words that were printed in front of you. There is research to suggest when you see and hear words that you're kind of tracking as they're being read, you add new words to your reading vocabulary that you didn't have before through that experience. So closed reading is one of those. Well, this dyad reading is also giving them that element of, with their partner, if they don't know a word, their partner's reading it, and thus over time they can pick up those new words, improving their sight recognition. So here's the 2 little kids. These kids are in the same grade. Tallest girl, the shortest girl, just how the partnership worked out. So don't think they're off grade level. They were the same grade. But they just sit side by side. They read aloud simultaneously. The lead reader uses a finger to track. We never told the kids who was the lead reader, but guess what? Kids who are more comfortable with books take over. Like, they're happy to lead because that's their thing. Over time, the kids became both proficient and it became more of a traded opportunity. But in the beginning, the more proficient reader generally does that role. And they read for 15 minutes a day. Now, in the study that was done in Davis, it was 95 days. They continued during the rest of the year. We've been doing it since late September in Washington County. And Karen, you guys just started in the last month or so? November, okay. So this is just the steps of like how to go about it, just kind of bringing this back to you. And if you want more information, myself, Sarah, Lisa Brown in our office is actually the teacher who did this in her own classroom that works in our agency now. If you're interested in trying a strategy that seems to have a good effect, please reach out. The data, if you remember, the average kid gained 213 Lexiles in 95 days. Okay, and reading that 2 to 3 grade levels above where they currently read instructionally. So this is pushing kids into more challenging text. Now in the elementary reading network, they went through the approach of using after-school programs. So we have some after-school programs pairing up kids in 2nd grade and 3rd grade and having them do this work. And to do that in their after-school programs. So although the classroom teacher might not be doing it, we can ensure the strategy is still accomplished in the after-school programs. So as you're looking at how can we improve our after-school programming, this is a really easy strategy. The hardest part is lexiling the books. But we do have a number of after-school programs that have kind of led this work up and probably would be willing, if you have an after-school program, you want to come see how it's working. Brandis emailed me last week and was super excited. The kids were loving it. They felt empowered and just kind of really engaged in their books, which is not always what happens in after-school programs, if you have ever walked through one. So it seems to be working well in terms of implementation. The Washington County school teachers, I'm going to pull their data next month, but they had to track the days they were doing it and submit that to me, and they're getting a little stipend to be our kind of trial group. So next fall, I'll bring you the data from that group to see if we are seeing some similar results out with teachers who are just trying out the dyad reading on their own with a little support from us at the agency. So just a couple strategies that seem to be working. Literacy blocks matter, and maybe doing some dyad reading could be potentially some positive ways to change student outcomes. I'm going to give you just a minute to process with someone at your table what you just learned or how you might be able to use that information. So partner 1, go first, then partner 2, add on, and then we'll come back together in 1 minute. Ten seconds. Oh, I can go back. All right, let's go ahead and come back. Any questions or thoughts that you need to ask of the group or of myself, or at least Sarah? Lisa's not here, but okay. Just wanted to do some bright spots of things that do seem to be working out in the world. I know you all have your own bright spots. I just am lucky to be invited to the Granite one, so I get to hang out there. All right, so in terms of just going back to legislation, just real fast, because I realized we didn't get your input from what Sarah shared with you on 53A, 17A, 150, which if you haven't heard, they're recoding all of the education bills potentially, so that number may go away. But right now, that's what it's called. Is there any, I want you to talk in your tables. Is there anything you're concerned about or anything we missed in terms of our potential suggestions for legislative change? The draft is done. It should be released soon once it's numbered, but the numbering won't happen until probably session, it sounds like week 2 or 3, because they have to recodify or decide if they're going to recodify the bills, and then they'll release everything. But until they decide of which way, if they're sticking with the current code or they're recodifying everything, they're not drafting anything officially, because all the numbers will change. Like it's going to be like parts F, G, and H or something. I don't know. All I know is they're changing things potentially, and so they haven't drafted anything. If you look, there is one education bill posted right now, and they posted it in 2 different ways, one with the new coding, one with the old coding, just so it'll be ready to roll very first thing in session. So there's a lot going on this year in session that hasn't happened in the past, so that recodifying, you won't see drafts of bills for a while. It sounds like week 2, week 3 is when you'll start to see things, which means session's going to be really hot and furious this year. A little different, because usually by now we have drafts to share with you. Like, here, look at these things. Not this year. So just be aware of that. I want to give you guys like a few minutes to talk at your tables. Did we miss something that you think is critical, or did we upset you in any way that we need to know now? Because the bill's not out. We have the ability to reframe or redraft as needed. At this point, the legislator has said they're happy with it. They're good with the way it is, so we're happy, which means it'll get posted. But if you're not happy, then we didn't meet your guys' needs. So we want to make sure we take a moment to get your feedback. So just take a few moments at your tables, and then we'll go around and share out if there is anything that you want to make sure we consider in that draft. Because this is our time. We don't want to draft it again. About 30 seconds. And if you need more time, just holler, but I don't want to waste your time either. All right, anything we missed, or I would swear, and it's not really a swear word, anything we pissed you off about? Like, you all know me too well at this point, so you got to just be brutally honest. This is how we learn and grow and improve. So what are we thinking? Are we feeling okay with the proposed changes? I know you don't get to see a draft, so I apologize for that, but they don't let us release drafts, and we haven't even seen the draft. We sent them what we want, and they're good with it, so I'm assuming it'll come out that way. Okay, because this is it for us. If you look at the bill later and you're like, I really want this out, or what about, did you attend to this line? Let us know. We have what we sent off, so we know what we sent in. But in terms of like your feedback, we want to make sure we get it right, because I don't want to open this bill next year. Next year, it will just be to get fiscal note addition, not to actually change any language. Because anytime we do this, you get those few crazies that we worry about messing with things. So hopefully we can stick there. Yeah. Yes. Yes. So the one-to-one match, when we proposed one-to-one match across, but the sponsor is not in support of that. So we said, what will you support? Because we don't want to lose that match. So she was fine with the district, but not so fine with bringing on the charters into that equation quite yet. I think if you see tax equalization happen, yeah, the problem right now is like your funding sources. You don't have the same streams in your systems. And so that was where the conversation landed. And to get the rest of the bill through, we said, okay. So continuing to try, just like the K-6, they weren't supportive of us going K-6 quite yet. Thought it would just dwindle down too much what we currently do. So we kept, we had to kind of meet where we could and give up in some spots too. And that was a spot that we had to die on and say, okay. Thank you for asking. Yeah, I'm sure it'll come up in your conversations too. And just for those online, it was the question around the one-to-one match at the district level only, not the charters. Okay. Well, if you do have any feedback and you just don't feel comfortable sharing it in front of your 40 closest friends here, feel free to email Sarah or I, and we'll be happy to respond and look at that feedback. And I must say, having done the Keep this morning, you guys have been great about sending us feedback, helping us make refinements in preparation. We are testing about 15, 20 kids this Friday, going out, and then we'll have a few more people test after we make the revisions based on what we learn on Friday, to go out in February to kind of do any final refinements to the items. But we will be testing and trying to get some time frames. Thanks to Davis, they went out and tested some kids already too. But we needed like sample materials. We had to make like the little book and stuff. So we have some sample stuff. It's not great, but it'll work. It'll get our job done to kind of give us some feedback. The biggest question on Keep Exit is the amount of time. Please help your teachers understand the small group should be done during the school day. Like when they're already pulling kids in small group, they're gonna, instead of doing their phonics lesson, they're gonna test the writing pieces. This should not be like, oh, let me figure out how to get small groups in after the school year's over. Like, do it during the school. That's why the last 4 weeks is there, so you could do some of the whole group items. We have a lot of people thinking differently about that. Like, they're going to have to pull small groups during the one-to-one meetings. I'm like, no, don't do that. And don't add that additional 20 minutes onto your one-on-one time. That would be a really long time for a kindergartner. So even when we go out and test this week, we're testing the kids one-on-one for the one-on-one items, and then we're going to bring back all those kids to do the small group, because sitting there for that long for a kindergartner is just not acceptable. We're even having a hard time saying we're going to test the whole thing in a day with kindergartners, just because it's a lot. We have tested the writing stuff. That is probably the feedback we've gotten the most on for Keep Exit. The writing stuff was tested out last spring, and the kids did really well. So if your teachers are like, our kids can't do that, then it's a teaching thing. It's a teaching not matching the standard. Because the kids, we have probably 50, 60 samples, and they're amazing. Obviously, full range. We had lots of kids write multiple sentences. So we've got to help frame our teachers' minds differently if they think kids can't, because we have proof that they can. And I think you guys have high expectation for kids, but it's not always truly disseminated at the classroom level all the time. Let me flip back. We have Heather here to do Dibbles, MOI, and kind of give you some updates on that piece. Heather Gross handles kind of elementary ELA, in assessment. So she's kind of our side appendage when it comes to teaching and learning and assessment. And she handles all the DIBELS trainings because Sarah and I was like, oh, it's an assessment. That's all you. So
They're happy to swing one that way, my way. Yep, and it's been mine ever since. Okay, so if you remember, we had DIBELS BOI trainings at the beginning of the year. This is just the next piece to that. We've been working very closely with our trainers, looking through creating those trainings, and we're very excited about the format of these MOI trainings. So when it comes to the MOI, it's basically the same purpose that you saw at the beginning of the year. We're also going to offer one at the end of the year, and it's the same format. So administrators come for a full day, and the next day the teachers come for the full day, and it's all about reporting. This is for Amplify and DMG users. Just know, DMG users, that you will need to input your data before you come, because otherwise the reports will not be ready. So Amplify, it's automatic, but DMG, you will need to have your data in so that when you come, the reports are able to be printed and used, and your data will be accessible. Coaches this time are encouraged to come to both sessions. So initially, we just had them come to the principal session, and then the more we talked about it afterward and the feedback we got, they're sort of the bridge between what happens in the classroom to what happens at the big picture. So to have them at both seemed more appropriate. So that is the format that we're running this time. We have these two flyers. We sent them out with the AD memo last week, and we also sent them out through the literacy team, and they speak to each one of the trainings and what it looks like. So as far as for school administration and district leaders and coaches, it's actually really exciting as far as helping build principal capacity in being instructional leaders. So the setup is helping them take their own data and input it into a PowerPoint presentation. You look at it through an Excel sheet and be able to take the data that was received and be able to propose it to their school in a way that is building a plan on how we move forward with where our data is. It also looks at their data in context to if they are in a district, where they are in that, and also in context to our UG goal. So looking at that across the board, that's sort of what this format of this training will be. The teacher training is very interactive. It's all about looking at our data and how we build small groups based on specific goals in learning. It's based on where teachers feel like their need is specifically, and we'll have small workshops running. It's much more interactive than what we saw at the beginning of the year, because we're right in the middle of it. We're right in the meat and potatoes of the year, and what you do and how we move data. So with this middle of the year, that's the format. We also have just at the bottom, if you go back and look at the flyers, some examples of what those PowerPoints will look like, some examples of what the teachers will be working from, what their graphic organizers will be, and then on both we just have the registration format. We try to get similar locations to where they were previously. It got tight. This time of year is busy. So here are the training sessions. And again, they run from 8:30 to 3:30, either principal coach session or teacher coach session. Any questions about those? Okay. And the presenter for these is the same person at every one. It's Steve King. He did most of them last time. He is a retired veteran principal, a lot of experience, really personal guy, great guy. So that's where we're at. Thank you. Yes? Yeah, no money. Sorry. Right. And that's probably why the location was available. So that's why we like, in hindsight, we're trying to start booking the end of year now, and then we'll know for next year to get them earlier so it doesn't end up happening that way. Thank you.
all right, so the way we pay for these PDs is through the money that goes for that $2.1 million for Amplify and DMG. They allow us to do PD, but the only thing we can do is pay the vendors. That's why we can't pay substitutes. This is our way of trying to bring PD with you still have a cost associated. So I apologize for that. The feedback we got has been pretty positive for these sessions if you've attended in the fall. I think it went really well. This one sounds even better to me. I think we probably, as we normally do, learned something from the first time around, and we did better for the second time. So I would encourage you to get somebody there to kind of learn the knowledge and skills, because if you're the one that can give this to your principals to help them, great, but it's always nice sometimes it's nice for them to hear it from somebody else. I go out to districts most of the time because they're like, I've said it, they just need to hear it from somebody else. It's not like I have anything new to say, it's just like they just need a different voice. So that's often more why I get called out sometimes. So Heather, ELA, oh, this is what she's covers. So if you need things and you're like, who do I call? That's her. And when you send it to me, I forward it to her. Because she needs work, right? No. So she handles kind of the early assessments. So in terms of early reading software, I am here for Sarah Young today for this because she was not able to be with us. They're out doing the digital teaching and learning site visits. The new RFP for vendors, so vendor contracts are up this year, so we have to have a new vendor contract in place for next year. Because remember, a literacy block, even if with the weaving happens, we still have another year, right? So we still have a year of software no matter what. So the RFP is being released, or was released already. It's going to close pretty quickly on February 2nd. This means we have potential for continuing with vendors, but also potential for new vendors out there. So Sarah had many reach out over the last year or so and saying, hey, we'd be interested. So there are some new vendors that are curious about the proposals. Providers will be released by the end of February for you all to, decide, are we going to stick with our provider? Are we doing this? That kind of thing. Who do we want to look at now? And then they'll release applications in April and open until mid-May for you to apply for what vendor and what product you want. They're running the RFP a little differently. Instead of a K3 product, they're running one RFP in one, but you have K1 that you can apply for or 2-3. So a vendor can apply for one or the other or both. Because some of our vendors are more appropriate for the upper and some are appropriate here. Not all are appropriate for the K1, like K3. Reading Plus is an example. They don't have a K1 product. So to apply for it doesn't make sense. So she broke that apart to kind of help really focus the intervention softwares in the right place. Additionally, that's not up on the side, is legislation. It sounds like we are trying again to get rid of if you fail kind of language, like that's just going to get wiped out. And then some language around personalized fidelity, which basically means the board will give you the right to choose what fidelity means in your own LEA. So that is the proposal up for this session. Like I asked Sarah, I'm like, so how are you going to persuade the governor? Because that's what happened last year. But it is what it is. So we'll see if that changes, but there will be a early intervention amendment coming around software. But remember, early intervention also has OEK in it. So you might be like, what's happening to OEK? They're just in the same bill. I don't anticipate any changes in OEK. But early reading software, they're proposing to get rid of the 2 years of failure and kind of just say the board will establish rules type thing. And then a personalized fidelity where you would personalize it to the student of what their fidelity would look like. And you guys would do that at the local level, not the state level. Okay. Questions about those changes or updates? All right, lots of info today, I'm sorry. And then the last one is just in your files. The What's Hot in Literacy report came out. It's always an interesting report to kind of see, are you in the same hot spots the rest of the country is? So if you want to take a look at it, it's a brief little infographic, but it might be something you're interested in. For example, early literacy is like the #1 thing. Well, what a surprise. We seem to be in the right place at the right time, everyone. So there were some interesting things in it if you just want to see, like, are you in the hot space of what it was like 3,000 teachers or something responded, or 3,000 educators. It's a kind of a small response rate for the What's Hot. It's put out by the International Literacy Association, but it's always interesting to look at every year. Like 1 year fluency was hot. That's not this year. So what's hot, and they also do the what should be hot based on what we know. Like it's always an interesting report. So just something to kind of add to your professional literature in your free time or your insomnia nights. Give you something to read. Okay. That is it, and we told you we would finish early today, so super exciting. We didn't take a break, so it wouldn't have been as early, but that's okay. If you have any questions or need any support, let us know. If you're staying for the state literacy improvement initiative group where you're going to stay in this room, but it'll be from 1 to 4. So please go get some lunch, go get fed, because your brain, I need your brains back for those of you staying. We have some good topics to discuss today. And if you're not, thank you for coming today. If you have questions, please stop and talk to us or email us, and we're happy to take those.